The train rattled into Stillwater, Montana, on a Tuesday morning that tasted like dust and dying dreams. Eleanor Hayes, or at least that's what the papers in her weathered carpet bag claimed, stepped onto the platform with nothing but those papers, $17 sewn into her coat lining, and a past she'd buried 3 states back under a different name entirely. She was 26 years old. She had brown hair that she kept pinned tight against her skull, gray eyes that had seen too much, and hands that bore scars she never talked about, the kind of scars that came from fighting back, the kind that came from losing, the kind that came from running. The platform was nearly empty save for an old man sleeping against a post and a boy of maybe 14 leaning against a wagon, chewing on a piece of straw. He looked her up and down with the casual cruelty of youth. "You the mail order?" he asked. Eleanor, no, Harlow. Her real name was Harlow Pierce, but she couldn't be Harlow anymore, couldn't ever be Harlow again. Straightened her shoulders and met his eyes. "I'm Eleanor Hayes," she said. "I'm here for Caleb Rohr." The boy snorted. "Yeah, you're the mail order." He grabbed her bag without asking and tossed it into the back of the wagon with a thud that made her wince. Everything she owned was in that bag, which wasn't much, which was the point. "Name's Danny," the boy said, climbing into the driver's seat. "I work the horses at Rohr's ranch. Well, the ones that don't try to kill you, anyway." Harlow climbed up beside him, arranging her skirts. "And the ones that do?" Danny grinned, but there was something dark in it. "There's only one that does. And he's killed 3 men so far, put 32 more in the hospital or the grave. Mr. Rohr's offering $10,000 to anyone who can ride him for 5 minutes. "That's a lot of money." "That's a death sentence," Danny corrected. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. "Ain't nobody gonna claim that prize. Ain't nobody stupid enough." Harlow watched the town roll past. The saloon, the general store, the church with its white steeple piercing the gray sky like a broken finger. Stillwater. Even the name sounded like something that had stopped moving, stopped living. "Why does he keep a horse like that?" she asked. Danny shrugged. "Mr. Rohr don't explain himself to nobody, but I heard tell he bought Nightmare, that's the stallion's name, off a trader about 3 years back. Horse was already mean then, just got meaner." "Nightmare," Harlow repeated softly. "Yeah, fits, don't it?" The ranch appeared after 30 minutes of riding through landscape that looked like something had beaten it into submission, flat, brown, endless. The main house was a 2-story structure of dark wood and stone, practical and cold. Behind it sprawled the barns, the bunkhouse, the corrals. And beyond those, separated from everything else by a good 100 yards, stood a single corral made of railroad ties instead of split rails. Even from this distance, Harlow could see the massive black shape moving inside it. "That's him," Danny said, following her gaze. "That's Nightmare." The stallion was pacing the fence line like a caged thunderstorm, all muscle and rage and terrible, brutal beauty. Even from here, Harlow could see the scars cutting through his coat, pale lines that spoke of whips and spurs, and hands that had met his resistance with violence. Something in her chest tightened. "Mr. Rohr's waiting for you in the house," Danny said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the main building. "I'll take your bag to the guest room." "Thank you," Harlow said. But she was still watching the horse. The front door opened before she could knock. The man who stood there was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes the color of winter slate. His face was weathered, hard-angled, the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. "Eleanor Hayes?" His voice was deep, rough-edged. "Yes." "Caleb Rohr." He didn't offer his hand. "You're late." The train was delayed and... "I don't care about the train." He stepped back, gesturing her inside. "We need to talk." The house was as cold inside as it looked outside. Dark wood floors, sparse furniture, no photographs on the walls, no flowers in vases, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here instead of just survived here. Caleb led her to a study lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened. He poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter but didn't offer her one. "I'll be direct," he said, not sitting down, not inviting her to sit either. I placed that advertisement for a wife because this ranch needs a woman's hand. I need someone to manage the house, handle the books, host when I have business associates visit. I need someone practical, someone who won't cause trouble. I understand, Harlow said quietly. Do you? Caleb's eyes cut to her, sharp. Because I've had 3 mail orders before you. First one took one look at the ranch and got back on the train. Second one lasted a week before she ran off with one of my ranch hands. Third one, he paused, jaw tightening. Third one tried to change things, tried to make this place something it isn't. What happened to her? I sent her back east with enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't here. He took a drink. I'm not looking for love, Miss Hayes. I'm not looking for companionship. I'm looking for a transaction. You do the job, you get food, shelter, and a stipend. After 1 year, if we both agree, we'll make it legal. If not, you leave with enough money to get wherever you want to go. Is that clear? It should have stung. Maybe it would have once, but Harlow had learned that clear, cold transactions were safer than warm promises. Promises broke. Transactions held. It's clear, she said. Good. Caleb set down his glass. Maria will show you to your room. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late. He walked out without another word. Harlow stood alone in the study, surrounded by unread books and the lingering smell of whiskey, and thought, this is fine. This is safe. This is far enough away that he'll never find me. She'd been telling herself that for 3 months now, through 4 different towns, 5 different names, 6 different trains heading west. Eventually, she might even believe it. Maria turned out to be a Mexican woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been running this house alone for too long. She spoke little English, but her smile said more than words could anyway. The guest room, Harlow's room now, she supposed, was small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a wash basin, a window that looked out over the corrals. Over Nightmare's corral. Harlow unpacked her few belongings, hung her 2 dresses in the narrow wardrobe, placed her brush on the dresser. She pulled out the papers that said she was Eleanor Hayes, 24 years old, born in Philadelphia, orphaned at 12, worked as a seamstress until answering Mr. Rohr's advertisement. All lies. Her real papers. Harlow Pierce, 26, born in St. Louis, married at 18 to Marcus Pierce, widowed at 25 when Marcus had died in what the law called a hunting accident, and what Harlow knew was something far more complicated. Those papers were burned, scattered in ashes across 3 states. She touched the scar on her left wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. A perfect circle, like someone had pressed a lit cigar against her skin and held it there while she screamed. Marcus's favorite punishment when she displeased him. She had 16 more scars just like it, scattered across her body like a map of failed escapes. But Marcus was dead now, and Harlow Pierce was dead too. All that was left was Eleanor Hayes, mail-order bride, trying to disappear into the Montana frontier, trying to survive. Dinner was a silent affair. Caleb sat at the head of the table. Harlow sat at the far end. Between them stretched 8 feet of polished wood and a canyon of unspoken rules. Maria served beef stew and cornbread. It was good, better than anything Harlow had eaten in months of running. The books are in the study, Caleb said without looking up from his plate. I'll expect a full accounting by the end of the week. Of course. The foreman's name is Wade Carrick. He's been with me for 15 years. What he says about the ranch operations goes. You don't countermand him. I understand. The hands eat in the bunkhouse. You eat here. You don't socialize with them. All right. Caleb finally looked up, his eyes cold and measuring. You're very agreeable, Miss Hayes. You're very clear about your expectations, Mr. Rohr. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. Then it was gone. Good, he said, and returned to his stew. After dinner, Harlow retreated to her room. She should have been exhausted. It had been a long day, a long week, a long 3 months of running, but sleep felt impossible. She found herself standing at the window, looking out at the corrals, at the one separated from all the others. The moon was rising, fat and silver, and in its light she could see Nightmare pacing his prison. Back and forth, like something wild trying to remember what freedom felt like. The stallion was magnificent. Even from here, even in the darkness, she could see the power in him. the terrible wounded power. They said he killed 3 men. They said he broke 32 more. But all Harlow could see was a creature in pain. She knew what that looked like. She'd seen it in the mirror every day for 7 years. The next morning, Harlow woke before dawn to the sound of men shouting. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. Maria was already in the kitchen, looking worried. ¿Qué pasa? Harlow asked. Her Spanish was limited, but fear translated easily. El caballo, Maria said, pointing toward the window. El diablo negro. The black devil. Harlow went to the window and felt her blood freeze. A crowd had gathered at Nightmare's corral, 8 or 9 ranch hands, all shouting, some holding rifles. In the center of the chaos, the stallion was rearing and screaming, a sound that didn't seem like it should come from a living thing. Harlow ran. She ran out the back door, across the yard, past the other corrals where the regular horses were whinnying in distress at the commotion. "What's happening?" she called as she pushed through the crowd of men. They turned to look at her, dusty, hard-faced men who clearly didn't think much of a woman in a nightdress and shawl running into their business. "Got himself caught in the fence wire," one of them said. "Tore himself up real bad trying to break free." Harlow pushed closer. Nightmare was tangled in the barbed wire that someone had apparently strung along the inside of the railroad ties. Illegal, cruel, but effective at keeping animals trapped. His front left leg was caught, blood streaming down from deep gashes. His eyes were rolling white with terror. And standing in the corral, holding a rifle, was a man Harlow instinctively knew must be Wade Carrick. He was maybe 50, with a face like old leather and eyes that held no warmth at all. He had the rifle trained on the stallion's head. "Only one way to deal with a horse this far gone," Wade said. His voice carried the flat certainty of a man who'd made this decision before. "Mr. Roar's been too soft. Should have put him down 2 years ago." "Wait," Harlow heard herself say. Every man turned to stare at her. "Who the hell are you?" Wade demanded. "I'm Eleanor Hayes, Mr. Roar's." "I know who you are," Wade cut her off. "And this ain't your concern. Get back to the house." "You can't just shoot him." "The hell I can't. I'm the foreman of this ranch, and I say when an animal's too dangerous to live." Nightmare screamed again, thrashing against the wire, making his wounds worse. Harlow's hands were shaking. She didn't know these men, didn't know this place, didn't have any authority here. All she had was 3 months of running, 7 years of surviving a monster in human form, and a bone-deep understanding of what it looked like when something was about to be destroyed for being too broken to save. "Please," she said quietly, "just let me try." Wade lowered the rifle just enough to look at her like she'd lost her mind. "Try what?" "Let me try to calm him down. Let me try to free him." "Lady, that horse has put 3 men in the ground." "Then what's one more?" Harlow heard herself say, and before anyone could stop her, before her own survival instinct could override whatever suicidal impulse had taken hold, she climbed over the fence. The shouting erupted behind her, men yelling at her to get back, Wade calling her a damn fool, someone saying to just shoot the horse now before it killed her too. But Harlow wasn't listening to them. She was walking toward Nightmare with her hands raised, palms open, moving slowly. The stallion's eyes fixed on her, his ears pinned back flat against his skull. Blood dripped from his trapped leg onto the dry earth. "Easy," Harlow whispered. "Easy, boy." She took another step. Nightmare bared his teeth, screamed a warning. "I know," Harlow said softly. "I know you're scared. I know you're hurt. I know everyone who's ever come near you has hurt you more." Another step. The stallion lunged at her, or tried to, but the wire held him, sent fresh pain through his trapped leg, made him scream again. Harlow stopped, waited. Behind her, she could hear Wade. "Somebody get her out of there before—" "No," a new voice said, deep, commanding. Caleb. "Sir, she's going to get herself killed." "I said no." Silence fell over the crowd. Harlow didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on Nightmare. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to help, and then I'm going to leave you alone. I promise." She took another step. Nightmare's ears flickered, still back, still afraid, but listening now. "That's it," Harlow breathed. "That's it, just like that." She was close enough now to see the scars clearly, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, layered across his coat like someone had spent years teaching him that humans meant pain. She knew exactly how that felt. "I'm going to touch the wire now," she said quietly. "It's going to hurt when I pull it off, but then it'll be better, okay? It's going to hurt, but then it'll be better." She reached for the barbed wire wrapped around his leg. Nightmare's whole body tensed. "Shh," Harlow whispered. "Shh, I know. Her fingers touched the wire. The stallion exploded. His head whipped around, teeth snapping at her. She threw herself backward, landed hard in the dirt, felt his hooves slam down inches from her skull. The men shouted. Wade raised his rifle again. "Don't shoot!" Harlow gasped, scrambling to her feet. But Nightmare had stopped. He stood there, shaking, blood running down his legs, staring at this strange woman who'd fallen at his feet and hadn't been trampled, hadn't been killed, hadn't done anything but stand back up. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Harlow saw it. The same thing she saw in her own reflection every morning. The desperation, the trapped fury, the exhausted hope that maybe, somewhere in this brutal world, there might be one person who wouldn't hurt you. Just one. "Okay," Harlow whispered. "Okay, not today. That's okay. We'll try again tomorrow." She backed away slowly, climbed out of the corral, and didn't say a word to any of the men staring at her like she'd sprouted wings. She walked straight back to the house, up to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with her hands shaking so hard she had to clasp them together to make them stop. What the hell was she doing? She was supposed to be disappearing, surviving, not making scenes, not drawing attention, not risking her life for a horse nobody could save. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Nightmare's eyes. All she could feel was the recognition. Broken calling to broken. Survivor to survivor. Someone knocked on her door. "Miss Hayes," Caleb's voice, flat and controlled. "We need to talk." Harlow stood, smoothed her skirts, opened the door. Caleb stood in the hallway, his face unreadable. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen anyone do." "I know." "You could have been killed." "I know." "Wade wants you off the ranch, says you're a liability." "I understand." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "Why did you do it?" Harlow met his eyes. "Because nobody else was going to." Something shifted in his expression, surprise again, maybe even the ghost of respect. "The horse stays," he said finally, "but you stay away from him. That's an order, Miss Hayes. Stay away from Nightmare, or I'll have Wade put you on the next train east. Are we clear?" "Yes, Mr. Rohr." He nodded once and walked away. Harlow closed the door and returned to the window. In the distance, she could see Wade and two other men working to free Nightmare from the wire. The stallion was fighting them every step, making it as difficult as possible, making them hurt for hurting him. She understood that too. "Stay away from him," Caleb had ordered, but as Harlow watched Nightmare finally break free, watched him limp to the far side of the corral and stand there bleeding and alone, she knew with absolute certainty she wasn't going to obey that order, not even a little bit. The next 3 days passed in a careful routine. Harlow managed the house books, helped Maria with the meals, learned the rhythms of the ranch. She was polite to the hands when she encountered them, distant with Wade, and formal with Caleb. But every morning before dawn, she walked out to Nightmare's corral. She didn't go in. She didn't even get close to the fence. She just sat on the ground about 20 feet away, wrapped in her shawl against the Montana cold, and talked to him. "Good morning," she'd say softly. "It's Eleanor. I'm just going to sit here for a while, if that's all right with you." The first morning, Nightmare charged the fence, screaming his rage. The second morning, he paced and snorted, but didn't charge. The third morning, he stood at the far side of the corral and watched her with ears pricked forward, curious despite himself. Harlow talked to him about nothing. The weather, the ranch, stories from the books in Caleb's study that she was slowly reading. She didn't know if the words mattered. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just the consistency, the showing up, the not running away. On the fourth morning, as she was telling Nightmare about a book on Greek mythology she'd found, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Danny, the boy who'd picked her up from the station, standing there with a bucket of feed. "You talk to him every morning?" Danny asked. "Yes." "That's crazy." Harlow smiled faintly. "So I've been told." Danny came closer, set down the bucket. Wade says you're going to get yourself killed. Says Mr. Roar should send you away. Mr. Roar's already told me to stay away from Nightmare. But you're not. No, Harlow admitted. I'm not. Danny looked at the stallion, then back at her. Why? It was a simple question. It deserved a simple answer. But Harlow found herself saying, because I know what it's like to be called a nightmare when you're really just trying to survive. The boy's eyes widened slightly. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, My ma used to say that sometimes the meanest animals are just the scared ones nobody took time to understand. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Danny's voice went soft. She died 2 years back. Fever. I'm sorry. He shrugged, the way kids do when grief is still too big to carry properly. Anyway, I came to tell you that Wade's planning to shoot Nightmare tomorrow. Says the horse is too dangerous, costs too much to feed, and ain't worth the trouble. He's going to do it when Mr. Roar goes into town for supplies. Harlow's blood went cold. Mr. Roar agreed to this? Didn't ask him. Wade figures it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Danny kicked at the dirt. Thought you should know, since you've been coming out here and all. Thank you, Danny. The boy nodded and walked away, leaving Harlow sitting alone with her thoughts and a creeping sense of dread. Wade was going to kill Nightmare tomorrow, and there was nothing she could do about it. She wasn't the owner, she wasn't the foreman, she was a mail-order bride with no authority, no power, and no right to interfere. She should let it happen. She should stay quiet, keep her head down, disappear into the role of Eleanor Hayes, practical and forgettable. That was the smart thing to do. That was the safe thing to do. Harlow stood up, brushed off her skirts, and looked at Nightmare. The stallion was watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. What are you going to do, those eyes seemed to ask. Run? Hide? Let them destroy me because it's safer for you? Harlow thought about Marcus, about the 17 scars he'd left on her body, about the days she'd finally fought back, and the choices she'd made that had turned her into a woman who had to steal dead names and run forever. She thought about all the times she'd been too scared to fight, all the times she'd survived by being small and quiet and forgettable, and she thought, not this time. I'm going to do something incredibly stupid, she told Nightmare quietly. And if it works, you're going to owe me, and if it doesn't work, we're both probably going to die. Sound fair? The stallion snorted. Harlow took that as agreement. That night, she waited until the house was dark and Caleb had retired to his room. Then she crept downstairs to the study, lit a single lamp, and opened the ranch's financial books. She'd been managing them for 3 days. She knew the numbers now, and she knew exactly how to make her case. She worked through the night, writing by lamplight, checking and rechecking her figures. By the time dawn broke, she had a document that was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. She bathed, dressed in her best dress, pinned her hair up carefully, and waited in the dining room for Caleb to come down for breakfast. He appeared at 6:30, stopped short when he saw her sitting there. You're up early, he said. I need to speak with you, Mr. Roar. It's important. Caleb poured himself coffee, sat down at the head of the table. Go ahead. Harlow slid the document across the polished wood. I've prepared a proposal. I'd like you to read it. He picked it up, scanned the first page. His eyebrows rose. You want to buy Nightmare? I want to propose a partnership, Harlow corrected. The horse currently costs the ranch approximately $40 per month in feed, medical care, and maintenance. He generates no income and, according to Wade's reports, poses a significant liability risk. I'm aware. I'm proposing that you give me 3 months to work with him. If at the end of 3 months, I can get him to accept basic handling, halter, lead, grooming, the ranch saves the cost of destroying him and potentially gains a usable animal. If I fail, she paused. If I fail, I'll leave. No argument, no severance, no questions asked. Caleb set down the document. You're willing to bet your position here on a horse? I am. Why? It was the same question Danny had asked, the same question Harlow had been asking herself. She could have given him the practical answer, that Nightmare deserved a chance, that putting down a healthy animal was wasteful, that with time and patience, almost anything could be salvaged. Instead, she heard herself say, Because I understand what it's like to be something people want to destroy rather than fix. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. This is about more than the horse, he said quietly. Maybe, Harlow admitted. Does it matter? The proposal is sound, the numbers work, and I'm the one taking all the risk. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Finally, he said, Wade's going to fight this. Then don't tell Wade. Tell him you've decided to give it more time. Tell him you want to see if the horse is worth the bounty you posted. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. You're asking me to lie to my foreman. I'm asking you to make a business decision that happens to align with keeping a living creature alive. Harlow met his eyes steadily. But yes, I'm asking you to choose me over him for 3 months. She saw it then, the moment Caleb made his decision. It wasn't in his words or his expression. It was in the way he picked up the document again, read it more carefully this time. 3 months, he said finally. You work with the horse every day. You document your progress. At the end of 90 days, if he's not safe to handle, he gets put down. And you're on the next train east. Agreed? Agreed. And Miss Hayes? Caleb's voice went hard. If that horse hurts you, kills you, or puts you in the hospital, the deal is void. I won't have your death on my conscience along with everything else. Understood? Understood. He held out his hand. Harlow shook it, felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. You're either very brave or very foolish, Caleb said. Can't I be both? The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Get to work, Miss Hayes. Harlow started that very day. She collected a stool, a bucket of oats, and a thick blanket. She set them up just outside Nightmare's corral, close enough that he could see her clearly, far enough that he didn't feel threatened. Then she sat down and started talking. Hello, Nightmare. My name is Eleanor, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time with you over the next 3 months. I'm not going to force you to do anything. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to sit here and keep you company. The stallion stood at the far end of the corral, watching her with deep suspicion. I know you don't trust me, Harlow continued softly. I don't blame you. From what I can see, everyone who's ever gotten near you has given you a reason not to trust. But I'm different. Or at least, I'm going to try to be. She opened the bucket of oats, scooped some into her palm, and held her hand out. Nightmare didn't move. That's okay, Harlow said. I'll just leave them here. If you want them later, they're yours. She set the oats on the ground near the fence and returned to her stool. An hour passed. 2 hours. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning frost. Harlow talked about the books she'd been reading, about the ranch, about the small birds that had built a nest in the eaves of the barn. She didn't talk about Marcus. She didn't talk about the scars under her sleeves. She didn't talk about the nightmares that still woke her most nights, gasping and shaking. But somehow, she thought Nightmare understood anyway. Around noon, Danny came by with a sandwich for her. You're really doing this, he said, half disbelief, half admiration. I'm really doing this. Wade spitting mad. Heard him yelling at Mr. Roar this morning. What did Mr. Roar say? Told Wade the horse stays for now. Told him you're in charge of Nightmare's care. Told him if he had a problem with it, he could take it up with the bank in town. Danny grinned. Wade didn't like that much. I imagine not. Be careful, Danny said, more serious now. Wade don't like being overruled, and he really don't like women telling him what to do. Noted, Harlow said quietly. After Danny left, she returned to her vigil. By the time the sun started to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple, Nightmare had moved closer. Not much, maybe 10 feet, but closer. And the oats Harlow had left by the fence? Gone. She smiled. Tomorrow, she told the stallion softly. We'll try again tomorrow. Content. The pattern continued. Every morning, Harlow arrived at dawn with her stool, her blanket, and her bucket of oats. She talked, read aloud, hummed songs she half remembered from her childhood. Nightmare watched her. Day by day, he moved closer. By the end of the first week, he was standing at the fence while she sat just on the other side. By the end of the second week, he was taking oats from her hand, snatching them quickly, ready to bolt, but taking them nonetheless. By the third week, he let her touch his muzzle through the fence. It was slow, delicate work. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some days he was calm. Some days he was agitated, pacing and snorting. Harlow learned to read his moods, to know when to push and when to simply sit in silence. The ranch hands thought she was crazy. Wade thought she was dangerous. Caleb watched from a distance, saying nothing. And Harlow? Harlow felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She was still playing the role of Eleanor Hayes during the day, managing the books, helping Maria, being polite and forgettable. But every morning with Nightmare, she was someone else. Someone who wasn't running. Someone who was fighting back against the cruelty of the world in the only way she knew how, by refusing to let it win. On a cold morning in the 4th week, as Harlow sat reading aloud from a book of Robert Frost poems, she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming toward the ranch, well-dressed men on expensive horses, led by someone who made Harlow's instincts scream danger, even from a distance. The man in the lead was maybe 60, silver-haired, wearing a coat that probably cost more than most people made in a year. He had the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. He also had a riding crop tucked into his belt, and when his eyes landed on Nightmare's corral, his expression turned predatory. Harlow stood slowly, a bad feeling coiling in her gut. The riders stopped at the main house. The silver-haired man dismounted, said something to his companions, then walked directly toward Harlow, toward Nightmare. "Well, well," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "So this is where the black bastard ended up." He stopped a few feet from the fence, looking at Nightmare the way someone might look at a possession they'd lost and wanted back. Nightmare's reaction was immediate and visceral. The stallion reared, screaming, his eyes rolling white with terror and rage. He slammed his hooves against the fence so hard the railroad ties shuddered. "Easy," Harlow said quickly, stepping between the man and the corral. "You're upsetting him." The man's cold eyes shifted to her. "And who are you?" "Eleanor Hayes. I work for Mr. Roar." "Ah," a thin smile. "I'm Silas Drayton, horse trader, and that animal belongs to me." Harlow's blood turned to ice. "Mr. Roar bought him 3 years ago." "Under false pretenses," Silas interrupted smoothly. "I was recently made aware that the sale contract was never properly filed, which means legally the beast is still mine, and I've come to collect." Behind her, Nightmare was still screaming, throwing himself against the fence with the kind of desperate violence that spoke of old wounds being reopened. Harlow looked into Silas Drayton's eyes and saw exactly what this man had done to Nightmare, saw it in the way he smiled at the horse's terror, saw it in the casual cruelty of his posture. This was the man who had broken Nightmare the first time, and he wanted to do it again. "You can't have him," Harlow heard herself say. Silas raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" "I said you can't have him. He's not for sale." "I don't recall asking for your permission." Silas's voice went sharp. "Get Caleb Roar, now!" Harlow didn't move. Silas took a step closer. "I said, I heard what you said." Harlow's voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering. "And I'm telling you that horse isn't going anywhere with you." For a moment, something flickered across Silas's face, surprised that this small woman in her plain dress was standing up to him. Then his expression hardened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, girl." "Neither do you," Harlow said quietly. The words hung between them like a challenge. Before either could move, Caleb's voice cut across the yard. "Silas, didn't expect to see you back in Montana." Silas turned, his professional smile sliding back into place. "Caleb, good to see you. I'm here about the black stallion. Seems there was an error with the paperwork when I sold him to you." "The paperwork was filed properly. I have the documents in my study." "Perhaps we could discuss this inside?" "Perhaps we could discuss it right here." The 2 men stared at each other, and Harlow saw a history there she didn't understand, something old and bitter. Finally, Silas said, "Very well. I'll be direct. I want the horse back. I'm prepared to pay double what you originally gave me. He's not for sale." "Triple, then." "Still no." Silas's jaw tightened. That animal is worth a fortune in the right hands. A trained war horse, properly broken. He's not a war horse, Harlow interrupted. He's a traumatized animal that you tortured into violence. Both men turned to look at her. Miss Hayes, Caleb said quietly, a warning in his tone. But Harlow was beyond warnings. She was looking at Silas Drayton and seeing every man who'd ever used power to hurt something weaker. She was seeing Marcus, and she was done being quiet. I've been working with Nightmare for 3 weeks, she said, her voice steady. And I've seen what you did to him. Every scar, every fear response, every violent reaction, that's all you. You didn't train him. You broke him. Silas's eyes went cold. Careful, girl. You're speaking of things you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Harlow met his gaze. You're the nightmare here, not him. The silence that followed was deadly. Then Silas smiled, a terrible thin smile that held no warmth at all. I see, he said softly. Well then, since you're so confident in your understanding, perhaps we should make this interesting. He turned to Caleb. The bounty you posted, $10,000 to anyone who can ride that beast for 5 minutes. Is it still active? It is, Caleb said slowly. Then I propose a wager. Silas's smile widened. Your little stable girl thinks she can fix what I broke? Fine. Give her 2 weeks. If at the end of that time she can ride Nightmare for the full 5 minutes, without being thrown, without being killed, you keep the horse. The debt is settled. I'll never come back. And if she can't, Caleb asked, then the horse comes with me, along with whatever contracts and paperwork I need to make it legal. No, Caleb said immediately. Absolutely not. But Harlow heard herself saying, I'll do it. Both men stared at her. Eleanor, Caleb started. I'll do it, Harlow repeated, louder now. 2 weeks. I'll ride him for 5 minutes, and when I do, you'll leave him alone forever. Silas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You have spirit, I'll give you that, but spirit doesn't keep you on an animal that's killed 3 men. Maybe not, Harlow said. But I'm not trying to dominate him. I'm trying to heal him. There's a difference. We'll see. Silas turned to Caleb. Do we have a deal? Caleb looked at Harlow for a long moment. She could see the conflict in his face, the desire to protect her warring with the recognition that she'd already made her choice. It's her decision, he said finally. Not mine. Excellent. Silas pulled out a pocket watch. 2 weeks from today, same time. I'll bring witnesses. And Caleb? His smile turned cruel. I'd invest in a good undertaker. You're going to need one. He walked away, mounted his horse, and rode off with his companions, leaving Harlow and Caleb standing in the dust. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb said quietly, You just bet your life on a broken horse. I know. He could kill you. I know that too. Then why? Because, Harlow said, turning to look at Nightmare, who was still pacing his corral, wild-eyed and shaking from Silas's presence. Sometimes the only way to save something is to risk everything. Caleb studied her profile, the strange woman who'd appeared on his ranch less than a month ago and was now threatening to upend everything. Who are you really, Eleanor Hayes? He asked softly. Harlow met his eyes. I'm someone who knows what it's like to run out of places to run to. Someone who's tired of surviving by being small. Someone who... She paused. Someone who's choosing to fight this time. Understanding flickered across Caleb's face. This isn't just about the horse, is it? No, Harlow admitted. It's not. Caleb nodded slowly. Then he said, You have 2 weeks. I'll keep Wade and the others away from the corral. Whatever you need, equipment, feed, time, you'll have it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. His voice went grim. If Nightmare kills you, I'll have to explain to Silas why he gets the horse anyway. And I really don't want to give that bastard the satisfaction. Despite everything, Harlow almost smiled. Then she turned back to the corral, to Nightmare, who was finally starting to calm down now that Silas was gone. 2 weeks. 14 days to accomplish what 32 men had failed to do. 14 days to turn broken trust into something resembling partnership. 14 days to save them both. Okay, Harlow whispered, more to herself than to the horse. Okay, we can do this. Nightmare snorted, tossed his head. He didn't look convinced. Harlow wasn't convinced either, but she'd made the bet, thrown down the challenge, and now there was nothing to do but follow through, or die trying. The night after the wager, Harlow didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the window panes and wondering what the hell she'd just done. 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours to turn a horse that had killed 3 men into something she could ride for 5 minutes without dying. The numbers didn't add up. The logic didn't work. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Silas Drayton's cold smile and the way Nightmare had screamed when that monster appeared. She'd seen that kind of terror before, in her own mirror, back when Marcus would come home drunk and angry, when she'd learned to make herself small and silent and pray he'd forget she existed. Except Nightmare couldn't make himself small. And Harlow was done praying. She rose before dawn, dressed in her oldest work dress, and braided her hair so tight it pulled at her scalp. Maria was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the morning bread. "Señorita," the older woman said softly, concern creasing her weathered face. "You look like Ghost." "I feel like one," Harlow admitted, pouring herself coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. "But ghosts don't need sleep, do they?" Maria made a sound that was half laugh, half worry. She crossed herself quickly, then pulled something from her apron pocket, a small cloth bundle tied with red string. "My abuela, she give this to me when I was a young girl," Maria said, pressing it into Harlow's hands. "For protection, for courage. You take it, see?" Harlow unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a smooth river stone, worn to perfect roundness by years of water and time. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "My abuela say when you feel small, you hold the stone. You remember, water is soft, but water breaks mountains. You understand?" Harlow closed her fingers around the stone, felt its weight and warmth. "I understand." Maria nodded, satisfied, and returned to her bread. But as Harlow headed for the door, the older woman called out, "Señorita Eleanor, that man who come yesterday, he is devil. You be careful with devils." "I will," Harlow promised, though she wasn't sure which devil Maria meant. Silas? Nightmare? Or the one Harlow carried inside herself, the one that whispered she deserved whatever pain came next? Outside, the Montana dawn was breaking cold and pale. Frost sparkled on the fence rails like scattered diamonds. Harlow's breath clouded in the air as she walked toward Nightmare's corral, the stone clutched in her left hand, her right carrying a bucket of oats and a coil of soft rope. The stallion was already awake, standing in the center of his prison, watching her approach with ears pricked forward. In the growing light, she could see the scars more clearly, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, crisscrossing his black coat like a map of every cruelty he'd endured. "Morning," Harlow said quietly, setting down her bucket but keeping the rope hidden behind her back. "I know you're wondering what happened yesterday. That man who came, Silas Drayton, he's the one who hurt you before, isn't he? The one who taught you that humans mean pain." Nightmare tossed his head, snorted hard. "Yeah," Harlow continued, moving slowly to her usual spot just outside the fence. "I thought so." "Well, he's coming back in 2 weeks, and when he does, I need to be on your back. I need to ride you for 5 minutes, because if I can't—" She paused, swallowed hard. "If I can't, he takes you back. And I know what men like him do to things they own." The stallion pawed at the ground, restless, agitated. Harlow sat down on her stool, pulled out the stone Maria had given her, turned it over and over in her palm. "My husband used to own me like that. His name was Marcus Pierce, and for 7 years he reminded me every single day that I belonged to him, that I was his property, his thing." Her voice went flat, distant. "He had this favorite trick. When I displeased him, and I displeased him often, breathing wrong or smiling wrong or existing wrong, he'd take a cigar and—" She stopped, pulled up her sleeve, showed Nightmare the perfect circle of scar tissue on her wrist. 16 more of these scattered all over. Some places people could see, most places they couldn't. He was careful about that. Didn't want anyone knowing he was breaking his property. Nightmare had gone completely still, watching her. I tried to leave 3 times, Harlow continued softly. First time he found me at the train station, dragged me home by my hair in front of everyone, and nobody stopped him because I was his wife and he had rights. Second time, I made it 2 towns over. He tracked me down, brought me back, burned all my clothes as punishment. Said if I wanted to run, I could do it naked. She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Third time, I got smart. Waited until he went hunting, took his spare rifle, followed him into the woods, and she stopped again. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud, even to a horse, but Nightmare seemed to understand anyway. He took a step closer to the fence, his dark eyes fixed on her face. They called it a hunting accident, Harlow whispered. Said his rifle misfired. And maybe it did. Maybe I just got lucky. Either way, Marcus Pierce died in those woods, and Harlow Pierce died with him. Because I couldn't stay her anymore. Couldn't stay in that town, in that name, in that life. So I ran. Became someone else. Kept running and running until I ended up here, calling myself Eleanor Hayes and pretending I never knew what it felt like to be owned. She wiped at her eyes roughly, angry at the tears. But I do know. I know exactly what Silas did to you. And I know what he'll do if he gets you back. So here's the deal, Nightmare. I need you to trust me enough to let me on your back. Not because I want to break you. Not because I want to prove I'm stronger. But because it's the only way to save us both. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind and the distant sound of the ranch waking up. Men's voices, the clang of metal, the whinny of horses in the other corrals. Then Nightmare did something he'd never done before. He walked to the fence, lowered his massive head, and breathed softly against Harlow's outstretched hand. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Okay, Harlow breathed. Okay. Thank you. She sat with him until the sun was fully up, talking quietly, letting him get used to the sound of her voice mixed with honesty instead of fear. When she finally stood to go prepare breakfast for Caleb, she felt something shift inside her chest. Something that might have been hope, if hope wasn't such a dangerous thing to carry. But as she walked back toward the house, she saw a figure leaning against the barn, watching her. Wade. The foreman's face was cold as winter stone. He pushed off from the barn, intercepted her path, stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. That was quite a story you told that animal, Wade said quietly. Didn't know we had a murderer working the ranch. Harlow's blood turned to ice. You were listening. I was checking the fence lines. Couldn't help but overhear. His smile was a knife edge. Now, I don't know if what you said was true or just some tale to make yourself feel special. Don't much care either. But here's what I do know. You're playing a dangerous game, girl. Making bets you can't win. Interfering with ranch business. Mr. Rohr approved my work with Nightmare. Mr. Rohr's got a soft spot for strays, always has. But soft spots get people killed. Wade leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and coffee. That horse is going to throw you, going to break your neck or crush your skull. And when it does, Silas Drayton's going to take him anyway, and all your pretty speeches about trust and healing won't mean shit. Maybe, Harlow said, forcing her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Or maybe I'll prove you wrong. Wade's eyes narrowed. You threatening me? No, I'm just telling you what's going to happen. For a moment she thought he might hit her. His hand even twitched toward his belt. But then footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them, and Caleb's voice cut through the tension. Wade, I need you to check on the north pasture fence. Storm damage. Wade's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, touched his hat brim in a mockery of respect. Yes, sir. He walked away, but not before shooting Harlow a look that promised this conversation wasn't over. Caleb waited until the foreman was out of earshot, then turned to Harlow. What did he say to you? Nothing important. Eleanor. He thinks I'm going to fail, Harlow said simply. He's probably right. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. You told the horse about your husband. It wasn't a question. Harlow's throat tightened. You were listening too? I was checking on you. Wanted to make sure you were safe after yesterday. He paused. The hunting accident. Was it an accident? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Harlow could lie. Should lie. Eleanor Hayes would definitely lie. But she was so tired of lying. Does it matter? She asked quietly. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Not judgment, not horror. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. No, he said finally. I suppose it doesn't, but for what it's worth, if he was the kind of man who put those scars on you, then whatever happened in those woods was justice, not murder. Harlow felt something crack open in her chest. The law wouldn't agree. The law's not always right. Caleb's voice went rough. I had a wife once. Sarah. She was... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter now. She's been gone 5 years. But I learned that some people are poison, and removing poison from the world isn't a crime. It's survival. They stood there in the cold morning light, two people carrying ghosts, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Harlow felt less alone. 2 weeks, Caleb said quietly. Whatever you need, you ask me. Not Wade. Me. Understood? Understood. And Eleanor? Be careful. Silas Drayton doesn't play fair. Never has. If he can find a way to cheat, he will. I'll watch for it. Caleb nodded and walked toward the house, leaving Harlow standing in the yard with Maria's stone still clutched in her hand, and the weight of everything she'd confessed pressing against her ribs. 2 weeks. The clock was already ticking. She needed to get to work. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and incremental progress. Harlow spent every waking hour at Nightmare's corral, moving from simply sitting outside the fence to actually entering his space. Slowly, carefully, always watching for the moment when trust would shatter into violence. Day 5, she got a halter on him. It took 4 hours of patient coaxing, and the moment the leather touched his face, Nightmare exploded, rearing, thrashing, screaming his rage. But Harlow held on, talking softly, refusing to pull or force, just holding steady until the stallion realized she wasn't hurting him. When he finally stood still, sides heaving, the halter secure, Harlow's hands were shaking so hard she could barely unbuckle it again. Good, she whispered. So good. We'll try again tomorrow. Day 6, the halter went on in 30 minutes. Day 7, she introduced a lead rope. Nightmare fought it, but less, testing rather than panicking. Day 8, she led him 3 steps before he balked. Day 9, she groomed him for the first time. A soft brush moving over his scarred coat, while he stood rigid with suspicion but didn't bolt. Day 10, she introduced the saddle blanket. That was when everything went to hell. The moment the fabric touched his back, Nightmare went wild. He reared straight up, screaming, striking out with his hooves. The halter rope ripped out of Harlow's hands. She stumbled backward, barely avoiding his hooves as they crashed down inches from her head. Easy, she shouted. Easy, it's okay. But Nightmare wasn't listening. He was back in whatever nightmare Silas Drayton had created, fighting ghosts and demons that Harlow couldn't see. He slammed into the fence so hard the railroad ties cracked. Blood appeared on his shoulder where he'd scraped himself raw. Harlow grabbed the rope again, tried to get close enough to remove the blanket, but Nightmare wheeled on her, teeth bared, eyes rolling white. She froze. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other, woman and beast, both breathing hard, both terrified. Then Nightmare lunged. Harlow threw herself sideways, felt his teeth snap shut on empty air where her throat had been a second before. She hit the ground hard, tasted dirt and copper, scrambled backward on hands and knees. The stallion followed, hooves thundering, ready to finish what fear had started. Nightmare, no! Harlow didn't know where the words came from, didn't know what made her scream his name instead of run, but the sound cut through his panic like a knife. Nightmare stopped, stood there, shaking, the saddle blanket hanging crooked on his back, blood on his shoulder, foam at his mouth. Harlow climbed to her feet slowly, her whole body trembling. She was crying, she realized distantly, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry, I pushed too hard. I should have known. She reached for the blanket, moving slowly. Nightmare flinched but didn't bolt. Harlow pulled the fabric off his back, dropped it in the dirt, then did something completely insane. She wrapped her arms around the stallion's neck and pressed her face against his scarred coat. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking. I won't hurt you. I promise I won't hurt you. For a long moment, Nightmare stood rigid. Then, impossibly, she felt him lower his head. felt the tension drain from his muscles, felt him lean into her embrace just slightly, as if he'd been waiting years for someone to say those words and mean them. They stood like that until the sun started to set, woman and horse, broken things holding each other together. When Harlow finally pulled away, her dress was filthy and her face was streaked with tears and dirt, but something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed. "Tomorrow," she told Nightmare softly. "We'll try again tomorrow, slower this time." The stallion snorted, shook his mane, but his eyes were calmer now. Harlow left the corral, latched the gate behind her, and turned to find Danny standing a few yards away, his young face pale. "I thought he was going to kill you," the boy said shakily. "So did I," Harlow admitted. "But you didn't run." "No, I didn't." Danny was quiet for a moment, then, "My ma used to say courage ain't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the thing anyway." Harlow managed a smile. "Your mother was a very wise woman." "Yeah," Danny kicked at the dirt. "I brought you something. Thought it might help." He handed her a leather-bound journal and a pencil. "What's this?" "For documenting your progress." "Like Mr. Rohr said, but also—" The boy hesitated. "Also, sometimes it helps to write down what you're feeling when things get too big to hold inside. My ma taught me that too." Harlow took the journal, felt the weight of it in her hands. "Thank you, Danny. Thank you." The boy ducked his head, embarrassed, and hurried off toward the bunkhouse. That night, after dinner with Caleb, another silent meal where they ate and didn't speak and somehow understood each other better for it, Harlow sat at the small desk in her room and opened the journal. She wrote down everything: the halter training, the lead rope, the grooming, the disaster with the saddle blanket. She documented it all in careful detail the way Caleb had asked, but on the last page she wrote something else. Day 10. I almost died today. Nightmare almost killed me, and for a moment I was ready to let him, because at least it would be over. At least I could stop running, stop hiding, stop being so goddamn tired all the time. But then I thought about Silas Drayton getting his hands on this horse again, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't give up. Couldn't let the monsters win. So tomorrow, I'll get up and try again, because that's what survivors do. We keep trying. She closed the journal, extinguished the lamp, and lay in the darkness listening to the wind. 4 days left. 96 hours. She needed a miracle, or at least she needed Nightmare to stop trying to kill her long enough to sit on his back for 5 minutes. Day 11 dawned with the smell of snow in the air. Harlow woke to find frost thick on her window and a note slipped under her door. North pasture. Come alone. C. She dressed quickly, grabbed her coat, and hurried out into the cold morning. The ranch was still sleeping, the bunkhouse dark, no smoke from the chimneys yet. Caleb was waiting at the north pasture fence, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Next to him stood a horse, a placid bay mare with kind eyes and graying muzzle. "This is Molly," Caleb said without preamble. "She's 20 years old, gentle as a lamb, and hasn't thrown a rider in her entire life." Harlow stared at him. "I don't understand. You've been training Nightmare to accept handling. That's good work. But have you ridden a horse recently?" The question hit like a slap. No, not since I was a child." "Thought so." Caleb opened the gate, led Molly through. "You've got 4 days to ride a killer stallion for 5 minutes. Before you can do that, you need to remember what it feels like to be on a horse at all. So you're going to practice. With Molly. Every morning for the next 4 days before you work with Nightmare." "But I need every hour with him." "You need muscle memory more," Caleb interrupted firmly. "You need to know how to move with a horse, how to balance, how to stay centered when everything goes wrong. Molly will teach you that. Nightmare will do the rest." Harlow looked at the old mare, then at Caleb. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because Wade told me what you said to Nightmare, about your husband, about the scars." He met her eyes. "And because my wife Sarah, she had scars too. Different kind maybe, but scars all the same. And I didn't help her. Didn't see what was happening until it was too late. So maybe helping you is—" He stopped, jaw tight. "Maybe it's the thing I should have done then." The raw honesty in his voice made Harlow's chest ache. What happened to Sarah? She took too much laudanum one night. Doctor said it was an accident, but I found the empty bottles hidden in her wardrobe afterward. 11 of them. His voice went flat. She'd been planning it for a while. I'm sorry, Harlow whispered. Don't be. Just get on the horse. For the next 2 hours, Caleb taught Harlow everything he knew about riding, how to mount, how to sit, how to use her legs and hands and voice to communicate. Molly was patient, gentle, forgiving of every mistake. By the time the sun was fully up, Harlow could manage a walk, a trot, and almost a canter without falling off. Better, Caleb said, helping her dismount. Tomorrow we'll work on emergency stops and falling safely. Falling safely? When Nightmare throws you, and he will throw you, you need to know how to hit the ground without breaking your neck. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. Harlow wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wouldn't get thrown, but they both knew better. Okay, she said instead. Tomorrow. She spent the rest of day 11 with Nightmare, reintroducing the saddle blanket. Slower this time, 1 inch at a time, praising every moment he didn't panic. By evening, the blanket rested on his back for a full 30 seconds before he shook it off. Progress. Tiny, fragile, terrifying progress. Day 12, Caleb taught her how to fall, how to roll, how to protect her head, how to get clear of hooves. They practiced in the dirt until Harlow was covered in bruises and her instructor was satisfied. Then she went to Nightmare and worked the blanket up to 2 minutes. Day 13, the blanket stayed on for 10 minutes. Harlow introduced the saddle, just showing it to him, letting him smell it, learn it wasn't a weapon. Nightmare trembled, but didn't bolt. That night, Wade cornered her outside the barn. Tomorrow's the day, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Tomorrow, you get on that devil horse and he kills you, and this whole stupid charade ends. Or I succeed, Harlow said quietly, and you lose. Wade's hand shot out, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. Listen carefully, girl. I've worked this ranch for 15 years, bled for it, built it, and I'll be damned if some mail-order bride with delusions of grandeur is gonna... Let her go. Caleb's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Wade released Harlow's arm immediately, stepped back. We were just talking. No, you were threatening her. There's a difference. Caleb moved between them, his presence solid and unmovable. I'm going to say this once, Wade. You touch her again, you threaten her again, you even look at her wrong, and you're done. Finished. I'll fire you myself and make sure every ranch from here to the Dakotas knows why. Am I clear? Wade's face went red, then white. You're choosing her over me? After everything? I'm choosing to back the person who's actually trying to do something decent instead of the one who wants to shoot anything he can't control. Now get out of my sight. Wade left, but not before shooting Harlow a look of pure hatred. When he was gone, Caleb turned to her. You all right? Harlow nodded, even though she was shaking. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He's not going to let this go. Caleb's expression was grim. Watch your back tomorrow, during the ride. I don't trust him not to sabotage something. I will. Caleb hesitated, then said quietly, For what it's worth, I think you can do this. I think you and that horse understand each other in ways the rest of us never could. So whatever happens tomorrow, know that someone believes in you. The words hit harder than they should have. Harlow blinked back sudden tears. I won't let you down. You couldn't if you tried, Caleb said, and walked away into the darkness, leaving Harlow alone with the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Day 14 arrived cold and clear. Harlow woke before dawn, dressed in her riding clothes, pants she'd borrowed from Danny, boots from Maria, a shirt that had belonged to Caleb's dead wife Sarah, and still smelled faintly of lavender. She braided her hair, tucked Maria's stone in her pocket, and went downstairs. The ranch was already awake. Word had spread. Men gathered in clusters, talking in low voices, casting glances toward Nightmare's corral. And at the gate, waiting with 3 witnesses and a pocket watch, stood Silas Drayton. He smiled when he saw Harlow approach. Good morning, Miss Hayes. Ready to die? Ready to prove you wrong, Harlow said evenly. Silas's smile widened. We'll see. The terms are simple. You have to ride him for 5 full minutes. If you're thrown, bucked off, or dismount for any reason, you lose. If the horse injures you badly enough that you can't continue, you lose. If 5 minutes pass and you're still on his back, you win. He pulled out the pocket watch. These gentlemen will serve as timekeepers and witnesses. Any questions? Just one, Harlow said. When I win, I want your word, in writing, in front of everyone here, that you'll never come near Nightmare again. Ever. Silas's eyes narrowed. Confident, aren't you? I'm certain. Very well. When you fail, the horse comes with me. Immediately. No appeals, no arguments. Agreed. They shook hands. His grip was cold and dry, like touching a snake. Then Harlow turned and walked toward the corral where Nightmare waited. The stallion was already agitated, sensing the crowd, the tension, the presence of the man who'd broken him. He paced the fence line, snorting, tossing his head. Harlow climbed over the fence, moved slowly toward the center of the corral. Hey, she said softly. It's me. It's Eleanor. Remember? We've been working together for 2 weeks now. You know me. Nightmare's ears swiveled toward her voice, but didn't come forward. I know you're scared, Harlow continued, pulling the saddle blanket from where she'd left it draped over the fence. I know that man out there hurt you. I know you don't want anyone on your back. But I need you to trust me. Just for 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes, and then he's gone forever. She approached slowly, the blanket held out. Nightmare backed away. Please, Harlow whispered. Please, Nightmare. I can't do this without you, and you can't survive without me. We need each other. The stallion stopped backing away, stood there, trembling. Harlow laid the blanket gently across his back. He flinched but didn't bolt. Good, she breathed. So good. She moved to get the saddle, a lightweight affair Caleb had found, barely more than a pad with stirrups, and heard Wade's voice call out from the crowd. This is insane, Roar. Stop her before she gets killed. She knows what she's doing, Caleb's voice replied, steady and sure. Harlow lifted the saddle, approached Nightmare again. The stallion's eyes were rolling, showing white. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to explode. Easy, Harlow whispered. Easy, boy, just like we practiced. She laid the saddle on his back. Nightmare screamed. The sound cut through the morning air like a blade. He reared straight up, and Harlow barely got clear before his hooves crashed down. The saddle slid sideways, hanging crooked. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed. Wade, probably. Silas called out, Time hasn't started yet, Miss Hayes, but I'm happy to call this now if you'd like to concede defeat. Harlow ignored him. She picked up the saddle, dusted it off, approached Nightmare again. I know, she said quietly. I know it's too much, but we're out of time, and I need you to try. Just try. For me. For us. She positioned the saddle again, moved faster this time, got it secured before Nightmare could react. The moment the cinch tightened, he exploded, bucking, twisting, slamming into the fence. But the saddle stayed on. Harlow waited until he'd exhausted himself, until he stood heaving and shaking in the center of the corral. Then she did the most terrifying thing she'd ever done in her life. She put her foot in the stirrup. Nightmare went rigid. It's okay, Harlow whispered, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. It's okay, I'm just going to... She pulled herself up. For 1 perfect second, she was on his back, seated in the saddle, reins in her hands. Then Nightmare detonated. He bucked so hard Harlow's teeth slammed together. She grabbed for his mane, for the saddle, for anything to hold on to as the world became a blur of motion and violence. He spun, reared, threw his whole body sideways. Harlow hit the ground hard, tasted blood, saw stars. The crowd roared. Silas's voice cut through. Well, that lasted all of 3 seconds. Shall we? But Harlow was already getting up. Her lip was split, bleeding. Her shoulder screamed where she'd landed on it. But she got to her feet, grabbed the reins, and climbed back on. Nightmare threw her again, and again Harlow got up. You can't break me, she said through gritted teeth, blood running down her chin. I've been broken before. It didn't take then, and it won't take now. She mounted a 3rd time. This time, Nightmare didn't buck immediately. He stood there, sides heaving, feeling the weight on his back, processing. And Harlow started to sing. It was a lullaby her mother had sung to her a lifetime ago, before the world had taught her that soft things got destroyed. The melody was simple, sweet, aching with memory. Nightmare's ears swiveled back, listening. Harlow kept singing, kept her hands gentle on the reins, her legs soft against his sides. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. The stallion took a tentative step forward, then another. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. He was walking, actually walking, with her on his back, circling the corral. The crowd had gone silent. Silas's face was turning purple. Caleb stood at the fence, his expression caught between disbelief and something that might have been pride. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Harlow's voice cracked, tears running down her face, mixing with the blood on her chin. But Nightmare kept walking, kept trusting, kept choosing her over his fear. Time, Silas barked. Start the clock. One of his witnesses pulled out a pocket watch. Timing begins now. 5 minutes? 300 seconds. It might as well have been 300 years. Harlow kept singing, kept her body loose and balanced the way Caleb had taught her. Nightmare kept walking, his gait steady now, almost calm. 1 minute passed, 2. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a sound that made Harlow's blood freeze, the crack of a whip. Nightmare's entire body went rigid beneath Harlow. The sound of the whip, that sharp, vicious crack cutting through the morning air, triggered something primal and terrible in the stallion. His ears pinned flat against his skull. His eyes rolled white. Harlow felt the shift in his muscles, the coiling of every nerve and sinew, and knew with absolute certainty what was about to happen. "No," she whispered. "No, no, please." The whip cracked again. Nightmare exploded. He reared straight up, so high that Harlow felt herself sliding backward out of the saddle. She grabbed his mane, wrapped her fingers in the coarse black hair, held on with everything she had. His hooves slammed back down, and immediately he was bucking. Not the measured testing bucks from before, but pure, mindless violence. The kind of bucking that had killed 3 men and broken 32 more. The crowd scattered. Men shouted. Someone screamed. Harlow's world became nothing but motion and terror. She could hear Caleb yelling something, could hear Silas laughing, could hear the pocket watch holder calling out the time. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. But it all seemed distant, underwater, drowned out by the thunder of Nightmare's hooves and the roaring in her own ears. The stallion spun, slammed sideways into the fence. Harlow's leg caught against the railroad ties, pain exploding up her thigh. She bit down on a scream, tasted blood from her already split lip. Nightmare wheeled the other direction, bucked again. Harlow lost her left stirrup, felt herself tilting, falling. She threw her weight forward, pressed her body against his neck, wrapped both arms around him in a desperate embrace. "I'm here," she gasped against his sweat-slicked coat. "I'm still here. I'm not leaving you." Another buck. Her teeth slammed together, cutting the inside of her cheek. "I know you're scared," she managed, her voice shaking. "I know that sound. It takes you back, doesn't it? Takes you back to when he hurt you." Nightmare screamed, a sound of such pure anguish that it made Harlow's chest crack open. "But he's not hurting you now," she said, louder, fighting to be heard over the chaos. "I'm not hurting you. Look at my hands." She held them up, showed him her empty palms, even as she swayed dangerously without anything to hold on to. "No whip, no weapon, just me." The stallion was still bucking, still wild, but something in his movements shifted, less panicked, more confused, like he was starting to remember who was on his back. "That's right," Harlow breathed. "It's me, Eleanor, the one who sits with you every morning, the one who told you about Marcus, about the scars, about running away." She started singing again, her voice cracked and broken, but steady. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Nightmare's bucking slowed. Not stopped. He was still fighting, still terrified, but slower. 3 minutes, the timekeeper called. Halfway there, halfway to freedom or death. Harlow kept singing, kept her body loose even though every instinct screamed at her to tense up, to brace for the next impact. She'd learned that from Caleb. Tension made you rigid, made you breakable. Staying soft meant you could roll with the violence instead of shattering against it. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The whip cracked a third time, but this time Nightmare didn't explode. He flinched, snorted hard, tossed his head, but he didn't buck, didn't rear. He stood there trembling, sides heaving like bellows, but standing. Harlow opened her eyes. She hadn't realized she'd closed them, and saw Wade standing at the fence, a bullwhip coiled in his hand, his face twisted with rage. "You son of a bitch," she heard Caleb snarl, and then there was the sound of a scuffle, men shouting. But Harlow couldn't focus on that. She had to focus on Nightmare, on keeping him calm, on making it through the next 2 minutes. She gathered the reins, asked him gently to walk. The stallion took one shaky step, then another. His gait was uneven, jerky with adrenaline, but he was moving. "Good boy," Harlow whispered. "Such a good, brave boy. Just a little longer. Just stay with me a little longer." 3 minutes 30 seconds. 90 seconds left. It felt like 90 years. Harlow could hear the crowd murmuring now, their voices a low buzz of disbelief. Someone said, "She's actually doing it." Someone else, "I'll be damned." And Silas Drayton's voice, tight with fury. "This is a farce. The animal was clearly spooked by external interference. The trial should be voided." "The term said nothing about external interference," Caleb's voice replied, cold as winter iron. "And the interference came from my foreman, not from her. If anything, she's proving she can handle the horse even under deliberate sabotage, which makes the demonstration more impressive, not less." 4 minutes! 60 seconds. Harlow's entire body was shaking now. Her hands were cramping from gripping the reins. Her leg throbbed where it had slammed into the fence. Her face was wet with tears and blood and sweat, and she couldn't tell which was which anymore. But Nightmare was still walking, still trusting her, still choosing her over his trauma. "We're almost there," she told him, her voice breaking. "Almost free. Both of us. Just don't give up on me now." The stallion's ears swiveled back, listening. And then, so quietly that Harlow almost missed it, Nightmare did something he'd never done before. He relaxed. Not completely. He was still wary, still traumatized, still carrying years of pain in every muscle. But that coiled tension, that constant readiness to explode into violence, it eased. Just a fraction. Just enough. Enough to tell Harlow that somewhere underneath all that fear and rage, the horse she'd been searching for actually existed. The horse he'd been before men like Silas broke him. 4 minutes 30 seconds. 30 seconds left. Harlow started counting in her head. 30, 29, 28. Each second felt like an eternity. 20, 19, 18. Nightmare's walk steadied, his breathing slowed. 15, 14, 13. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. 10, 9, 8. Harlow's vision was blurring. She blinked hard, forcing her eyes to focus. 5, 4, 3. She could see Caleb at the fence, his knuckles white where he gripped the rail, his face tight with something that looked like hope. 2, 1. 5 minutes! The timekeeper's voice rang out across the corral like a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the crowd erupted. Men were shouting, some in celebration, some in disbelief. Money was changing hands. Apparently people had been betting on whether she'd survive. Danny was jumping up and down, whooping like he'd lost his mind. And Harlow sat on Nightmare's back, barely able to process what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She slid off the stallion carefully, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. Nightmare turned his head, nuzzled her shoulder gently, and Harlow wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed. "We did it," she whispered into his mane. "We did it. You're free. You're free." The stallion stood quiet, let her cry, and in that moment Harlow knew something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't just tolerance anymore. This was the beginning of trust. Real trust. The kind that could build something lasting. "Miss Hayes," Silas Drayton's voice cut through her relief like a blade. Harlow turned, still holding on to Nightmare for support, and faced the man who'd tried to destroy them both. Silas's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "Congratulations. You've proven you can sit on a horse for 5 minutes. Quite the accomplishment." "The terms were clear," Harlow said quietly. "I won. Nightmare stays here, and you leave. Forever." "About that." Silas smiled, and it was the smile of a snake about to strike. I've been reviewing the paperwork on this animal, and I've discovered some interesting discrepancies. It seems the original bill of sale was never properly notarized, which means the horse technically still belongs to me, regardless of any wagers made today. Caleb stepped forward, his expression dangerous. That's bullshit, and you know it, Silas. The sale was legal. Was it? I wonder what a judge would say. Silas's smile widened. Of course, we could settle this in court. That would take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, I could file an injunction claiming the horse is stolen property, have him impounded, sent to a holding facility while the case proceeds. He paused. I'm sure they'd take excellent care of him there. The threat was clear. Even if Silas didn't win in court, he could make Nightmare's life hell in the process. Harlow felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. What do you want? I want what I've always wanted, that horse, but I'm a reasonable man. Silas pulled a document from his coat pocket. I'm prepared to offer a compromise. I'll drop all legal challenges and leave the horse here. But in exchange, I want this ranch's cooperation on a business venture I'm developing. A breeding program for war horses. Roar's land and facilities would be perfect for it. All I need is his signature agreeing to lease me the South Pastures for the next 5 years. No, Caleb said flatly. No? Silas raised an eyebrow. Even if refusing means I take the horse anyway? Through the courts, through legal means you can't fight. Especially then. Silas's expression hardened. You're willing to lose the animal over pride. I'm willing to lose a hell of a lot more than that to keep you off my land. Caleb's voice was steel-wrapped in ice. I know what your breeding program really is, Silas. I know you're using laudanum and cocaine to make the horses aggressive, making them addicts so they'll fight harder, die faster. I won't be part of that. The crowd had gone quiet again, listening. Silas's mask of civility cracked. Careful, Caleb. Accusations like that could be considered slander. Truth isn't slander. Truth is whatever can be proven in court, and I have better lawyers than you do. They stared at each other, two men with a history Harlow didn't fully understand but could feel crackling in the air between them like lightning before a storm. Finally, Silas turned back to Harlow. Last chance, Miss Hayes. Convince Roar to accept my offer, or I take the horse. Your choice. Harlow looked at Caleb, saw the rigid set of his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists. Saw a man who'd already lost too much to compromise and wouldn't bend even if it cost him everything. She looked at Nightmare, standing quiet in the center of the corral, still saddled, still trusting her. She thought about Marcus, about the years she'd spent bending, compromising, making herself small to survive, and she thought, not anymore. No, Harlow said clearly. Silas blinked. Excuse me? I said no. You don't get the horse. You don't get the land. You don't get anything except a promise that if you ever set foot on this ranch again, I'll make sure everyone from here to St. Louis knows exactly what your breeding program involves. I'll write letters to every newspaper, every sheriff, every rancher who might consider doing business with you. I'll make it my life's work to destroy your reputation the way you tried to destroy this horse. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're bluffing. Am I? Harlow took a step forward, her voice dropping to something cold and deadly. I've killed one monster already. What's one more? She saw it register in his eyes. The recognition that she wasn't speaking metaphorically, that this small, bloodied woman standing in front of him was absolutely capable of following through on her threat, and more importantly, that she wanted to. Silas's face went white, then red. You're insane. Maybe, but I'm also right. Harlow held his gaze. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a document, legally binding, properly notarized, that surrenders all claims to Nightmare, now and forever. In exchange, I won't destroy you. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. And if I leave it, then I destroy you anyway, and we keep the horse through the courts. It'll be expensive and annoying, but Caleb's willing to fight. Aren't you Mr. Roar? Absolutely, Caleb said, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. Silas looked between them, his jaw working. Harlow could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to find an angle. There wasn't one. He'd underestimated her, thought she was just some frightened mail-order bride who'd gotten lucky. He'd had no idea what she really was, what surviving Marcus had turned her into. "Fine," Silas spat finally. "Fine. I'll sign your damn document, but this isn't over, Miss Hayes. You've made an enemy today." "Good," Harlow said quietly. "I collect them." The document was drawn up within the hour. One of Silas's witnesses happened to be a notary, convenient that, and the paperwork was signed, sealed, and filed before noon. Nightmare officially belonged to Caleb Rohr's ranch. Silas and his men rode off without another word, but not before Silas shot Harlow a look that promised retribution someday, somehow. Harlow watched them go and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Let him try. She'd face that threat when it came. After the crowd dispersed, after the excitement died down, Harlow found herself alone in the corral with Nightmare. She removed his saddle carefully, groomed him, checked him for injuries from the earlier violence. "You did so good," she told him softly. "I'm so proud of you." The stallion leaned into her touch, his dark eyes half closed. "We're going to be okay now," Harlow continued. "Both of us. No more running, no more hiding. We're going to stay right here and figure out how to live instead of just survive." Footsteps behind her. She turned to find Caleb standing at the fence, holding a cloth and a basin of water. "Thought you might want to clean up," he said. "You're bleeding pretty bad." Puss. Harlow touched her face, felt the dried blood crusted around her mouth and chin. "I forgot. Adrenaline does that." Caleb climbed into the corral, set down the basin. "May I?" She nodded. He dipped the cloth in the water, wrung it out, and began gently cleaning the blood from her face. His touch was careful, almost reverent. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "And the stupidest, but mostly brave. Thank you, I think." When Wade cracked that whip, Caleb's jaw tightened. "I wanted to kill him. Would have, if Danny hadn't held me back." "Where's Wade now?" "Fired, packing his things. He'll be gone by sunset." Caleb met her eyes. "I should have gotten rid of him years ago. He'd been getting meaner, more controlling, but he knew the ranch so well, and I was—" He paused. "I was too tired to fight him, too tired to care. And now? Now I'm not tired anymore." A small smile touched his lips. "Turns out watching a woman half my size face down a killer horse and a monster of a man is pretty inspiring." Harlow felt heat creep into her cheeks, despite the cold. "I didn't do it to inspire anyone." "I know. You did it because it needed doing, because no one else would." Caleb finished cleaning her face, sat back. "That's what makes it inspiring." They were quiet for a moment, just looking at each other. Then Caleb said, "The original agreement was that you'd leave after a year if things didn't work out. I want to amend that." Harlow's heart stuttered. "You're firing me?" "No, I'm asking you to stay, permanently. Not as a mail-order bride, not as a transaction, just stay. Help me run this ranch. Help me make it into something better than it's been, something that doesn't break things just because they're difficult." "Caleb, I know you're not Eleanor Hayes," he interrupted gently. "I don't know who you really are, and I don't need to know. All I know is that you're someone who deserves a place to belong, and if you want it, that place is here." Harlow felt tears prick her eyes again. "I'm Harlow," she whispered. "Harlow Pierce. And I killed my husband. Shot him in the woods and made it look like an accident." "Good," Caleb said simply. "He deserved it." "The law might not agree." "Then the law can go to hell." He stood, offered her his hand. "What do you say, Harlow Pierce? Will you stay?" She looked at his outstretched hand, at Nightmare standing quiet and trusting beside her, at the ranch spread out in the Montana wilderness, harsh and beautiful and real. She thought about all the places she'd run to, all the names she'd hidden behind, all the years she'd spent being small and scared and temporary, and she thought, enough. "I'll stay," she said, and took his hand. Caleb pulled her to her feet, and for just a moment they stood close enough that Harlow could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me why I built this place, what it was supposed to be." Before Harlow could respond, Danny came running across the yard, his young face flushed with excitement. "Miss Eleanor, I mean, Miss Harlow, ma'am. The boy skidded to a stop, breathing hard. There's people coming, lots of people, from town. They heard what you did and they want to see Nightmare. Harlow looked at Caleb, confused. He smiled wryly. Small town. Word travels fast. I suspect you're about to become something of a legend. I don't want to be a legend. I just want to... But she didn't get to finish that sentence because the people started arriving. First came the doctor from town, Dr. Harrison, a portly man with kind eyes who insisted on examining both Harlow and Nightmare for injuries. He declared the horse miraculously unscathed, and Harlow lucky she hadn't broken anything important. Then came the newspaper editor, Mr. Finch, who wanted to write a story about the woman who'd tamed the untamable horse. Harlow refused the interview 3 times before Caleb pulled her aside and said quietly, "Let him write it. The more people who know what you did, the harder it'll be for anyone, Silas or otherwise, to make you disappear." So she sat for the interview, chose her words carefully, and made sure the story focused on patience and trust rather than dominance and violence. By evening, half the town had cycled through the ranch. Women brought food, casseroles and pies and bread still warm from the oven. Men came to see the horse, to marvel at his size and spirit. Children dared each other to get close to the fence, squealing and running away when Nightmare so much as looked in their direction. Through it all, Harlow felt like she was watching someone else's life, some other woman's victory. It didn't feel real yet. Maybe it wouldn't for a long time. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the crowd finally thinned. Maria served dinner for just the 3 of them, Harlow, Caleb, and Danny, who'd been invited to eat in the main house as thanks for his help. The meal was warm and filling and punctuated by comfortable silence. Afterward, Harlow excused herself and walked out to Nightmare's corral one last time. The stallion was dozing in the corner, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. When he heard her approach, his ears swiveled forward. "Hey," Harlow said softly, climbing over the fence. "Just me. Wanted to say goodnight." She walked to him slowly, laid her hand on his neck, felt the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me, for choosing me, for being brave when I needed you to be." Nightmare turned his head, nuzzled her shoulder gently. And standing there in the gathering darkness, Harlow felt something she hadn't felt in years, safe. Not because the danger was gone. Silas was still out there, still angry. Wade was gone, but his hatred remained. And somewhere, maybe, someone might still be looking for the woman who'd killed Marcus Pierce. But for the first time in forever, Harlow wasn't facing those dangers alone. She had Nightmare. She had Caleb. She had Danny and Maria, and a ranch that was starting to feel like home. She had a name, her real name, that she could speak aloud without fear. And most importantly, she had herself back. The version of herself that had existed before Marcus broke her. The version that was brave and fierce and willing to fight for things that mattered. "Tomorrow," she told Nightmare, "we start building something new, something better, a place where broken things can heal." The stallion snorted softly, as if in agreement. Harlow smiled, pressed her forehead against his neck, and breathed in the smell of horse and hay and Montana wind. For the first time in 3 months of running, she wasn't planning her next escape. She was planning her future. And it started here. But as she turned to head back to the house, she saw something that made her freeze. A figure standing at the edge of the property, barely visible in the twilight. Too far away to make out details, but the posture was familiar. Watching. Waiting. Harlow's hand went instinctively to her pocket, to Maria's stone. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, just watched. Then, as the last light faded, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering night. Harlow stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding. It could have been anyone, a curious townsperson, a ranch hand from a neighboring property, or it could have been something else. Someone else. She walked back to the house quickly, locked the door behind her, and checked the windows twice before going upstairs. In her room, she pulled out the journal Danny had given her and wrote, "Day 14. I won. Nightmare is safe. Silas is gone. I'm staying." But someone was watching the ranch tonight, standing just beyond the fence line, like they were waiting for something. I told Caleb I was done running. And I meant it. But that doesn't mean the past has stopped chasing me. It just means that when it catches up, I'll be ready. She closed the journal, extinguished the lamp, and lay in the darkness listening to the wind and the distant sound of horses settling in for the night. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did for the first time in months, Harlow Pierce didn't dream of running. She dreamed of standing her ground. And that, she thought as consciousness faded, was its own kind of victory. The war wasn't over, but she'd won the first battle, and tomorrow she'd start preparing for the next one. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The figure returned 3 nights in a row. Always at dusk, always standing just beyond the property line where the ranch land met the open Montana wilderness. Never approaching, never speaking, just watching with a stillness that made Harlow's skin crawl. On the 4th night, she'd had enough. She waited until the shadow appeared again, then grabbed her coat and one of Caleb's rifles from the study. Maria tried to stop her at the door, rapid Spanish warnings that Harlow didn't need to understand to get the meaning of, "Don't go out there alone, it's not safe. Wait for Senor Roar." But Harlow had spent too many years being afraid of shadows. She pushed past Maria's protests and walked out into the cold evening air, the rifle held steady in hands that had learned to shoot in those Missouri woods where Marcus had died. The figure didn't move as she approached, didn't run, just stood there. And as Harlow got closer, the dying light revealed details that made her heart stop. It was a woman, tall, rail-thin, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that looked like it had been carved from grief and determination in equal measure. She wore traveling clothes dusty from the road and boots that had seen better days. But her eyes were sharp and knowing, and they fixed on Harlow with an intensity that felt like being seen all the way down to the bone. "Eleanor Hayes," the woman said. Her voice was low, rough-edged. "Or should I call you Harlow Pierce?" Harlow raised the rifle. "Who are you?" "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm a journalist from St. Louis." The woman reached slowly into her coat pocket, pulled out a leather notebook. "I've been tracking you for 3 months." The words hit like a physical blow. Harlow's finger moved to the trigger. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Catherine's expression didn't change. "Marcus Pierce died in a hunting accident last October. His widow disappeared 3 days after the funeral. The sheriff ruled it accidental, but there were questions. Always questions when a wealthy man dies and his wife vanishes. If the sheriff ruled it accidental, then it was accidental." Harlow's voice was steady, but her heart was hammering. "I left because I had nothing keeping me there." "You left because you were running, and you've been running ever since. Kansas City, Denver, Cheyenne, and now here. 4 different names in 4 different towns. That's a lot of running for someone with nothing to hide." Harlow kept the rifle trained on Catherine's chest. "What do you want?" "The truth." Catherine took a step forward. "I've spent years investigating men like Marcus Pierce, men who hurt women behind closed doors, who use their money and position to get away with it, men who turn wives into property and call it marriage." Her voice went hard. "I know what he was. I know what he did to you, and I know he didn't die in an accident." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind and the distant sound of horses. Finally, Harlow said quietly, "If you know all that, then you know what happens if I admit to anything. They'll hang me." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll rule it self-defense." Catherine's eyes were fierce. "But either way, his story deserves to be told. Not the sanitized version his family put in the papers. Beloved husband, tragic accident, devoted widow, too grief-stricken to stay. The real story. What he did to you. What you had to do to survive." "Why?" Harlow's grip on the rifle tightened. "Why do you care?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she unbuttoned her high collar, pulled it down to reveal a scar across her throat. Thin, precise, the kind of scar that came from a blade held by someone who knew exactly where to cut. "Because I had a husband like Marcus once," she said softly. "And I didn't have your courage. I just kept taking it, kept thinking if I was good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, he'd stop. Until the night he decided perfect wasn't enough anymore and went for my throat." She touched the scar gently. "My brother found me, saved me, killed him. and my brother hanged for murder while I lived with the knowledge that I'd been too weak to save myself. Harlow lowered the rifle slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just let me tell your story. Let me tell the world what these men are, what they do, what it costs to escape them. Catherine's voice was urgent now. I'm not here to destroy you, Harlow. I'm here to give you a chance to speak truth to power, to make sure Marcus Pierce doesn't get remembered as some tragic victim of fate, to make sure other women know they're not alone. And if I say no, then I write nothing, walk away. Your secret stays your secret. Catherine met her eyes. But I think you know that secrets have a cost too. They fester, they poison, they keep you running forever. Harlow thought about the past 3 months, the constant fear, the fake names, the exhaustion of always looking over her shoulder. She thought about standing in front of Silas Drayton 3 days ago and threatening to destroy him if he came after Nightmare. She thought about telling Caleb the truth and finding acceptance instead of judgment. Maybe Catherine was right. Maybe the only way to stop running was to stand still and tell the truth. Consequences be damned. Not here, Harlow said finally. And not tonight. But if you're staying in town, come to the ranch tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk then. Catherine nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided what I'm going to tell you. Fair enough. Catherine started to turn away, then paused. For what it's worth, what you did with that horse, that took more courage than most people have in their entire lives. Whatever else you've done, you're not the monster the law might say you are. She walked away into the gathering darkness, leaving Harlow standing alone with the rifle and the weight of a decision that could change everything. When Harlow returned to the house, she found Caleb waiting in the study with a glass of whiskey and a concerned expression. Maria said you went out armed, he said without preamble. Want to tell me what that was about? Harlow set the rifle down carefully, sank into the chair across from him. There's a woman, a journalist from St. Louis. She knows who I am, what I did. She wants to write about it. Caleb's expression went dangerously still. Is she threatening you? No. Actually, Harlow paused, trying to find the right words. She's offering me a choice. Tell my story publicly or keep running forever. That's not a choice. That's blackmail dressed up as empowerment. Maybe. Or maybe it's an opportunity. Harlow leaned forward. I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of hiding. Tired of flinching every time someone says my name wrong. Tired of waiting for the past to catch up with me. So you're going to hand yourself over to the law? Let them decide whether killing your abusive husband was justified? Caleb's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. That's insane. Is it? You told me yourself that removing poison from the world isn't a crime, it's survival. Maybe it's time I stopped treating it like something shameful. The difference between what I told you and what a judge will say is a courtroom and a rope. Caleb stood abruptly, paced to the window. I just found someone worth keeping on this ranch, someone who makes it feel less like a tomb. I'm not going to sit quietly while you throw yourself to the wolves. The raw emotion in his voice made Harlow's chest ache. I'm not throwing myself anywhere. I'm taking control of my own story. There's a difference. Not to the law there isn't. They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Harlow said softly, What would you do if you were me? Caleb turned back to the window, was quiet for a long moment. I'd probably do exactly what you're planning, which is why I'm terrified. He pressed his forehead against the glass. Sarah kept secrets, kept her pain hidden because she thought that's what strength looked like. And it killed her just as surely as if she'd put a gun to her head. So maybe you're right. Maybe speaking truth is the only way to survive it. He turned to look at her. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. I haven't decided yet, Harlow said. I'm meeting with her tomorrow, hearing what she has to say, then I'll make a choice. And if you choose to go public, if they come for you, then you let them take me. You don't fight. You don't put yourself or this ranch at risk. Her voice cracked. You just remember that I chose this, that it wasn't your fault.
Oh, like hell.
Caleb's voice was fierce. If they come for you, they go through me first, and Danny, and Maria, and every person in this town who saw what you did with Nightmare and knows damn well you're no murderer. Harlow felt tears prick her eyes. You can't save everyone, Caleb. Your wife taught you that. Maybe not, but I can sure as hell try to save you. The next afternoon, Catherine Wells arrived at the ranch in a hired buggy, carrying her notebook and a leather satchel that looked like it had traveled the world and back. Harlow met her at the door, led her to the kitchen where Maria had laid out coffee and bread, still warm from the oven. The older woman eyed Catherine with deep suspicion, made the sign of the cross twice, and muttered something in Spanish that definitely wasn't a blessing. She doesn't trust me, Catherine observed mildly as Maria retreated. She's smart. Harlow poured coffee, sat down across from the journalist. Tell me about your brother, the one who killed your husband. Catherine's eyes flickered with old pain. His name was Thomas. He was 2 years younger than me, worked as a clerk, never hurt anyone in his life until the night he found me bleeding on the kitchen floor. Then he picked up the knife my husband had dropped, and... She paused. It was quick, merciful even, more than the bastard deserved. And they hanged him for it. Self-defense of another isn't recognized in most courts, especially when the defender is poor and the dead man is rich. Catherine's voice was bitter. Thomas went to the gallows swearing he'd do it again. That saving me was worth dying for, and I've spent every day since trying to make that sacrifice mean something. By exposing men like Marcus, by telling the truth, by making sure their victims know they're not alone, not crazy, not weak for surviving however they could. Catherine opened her notebook. That's what I want to do with your story, Harlow. Not sensationalize it, not turn you into some kind of folk hero or villain. Just tell it honestly. Let other women see themselves in you. Let them know there's a way out, even if it's hard. Harlow wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, felt the warmth seep into her cold fingers. And if telling my story gets me arrested, hanged, then we make sure the story spreads before that happens. Make sure enough people hear it that your death becomes a rallying cry instead of a cautionary tale. Catherine leaned forward. I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. Publishing this could destroy you, but it could also change things. Could make the next woman in your position feel less alone, less hopeless. Could make the next judge think twice before ruling a clear case of self-defense as murder. That's a lot of maybes. It is, but sometimes maybe is all we get. Harlow looked out the window at Nightmare's corral. The stallion was grazing peacefully, his black coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a monster everyone wanted dead. Now he was a symbol of hope, of healing, of the possibility that broken things could be made whole again, all because someone had been willing to take a risk. If I do this, Harlow said slowly, I want some conditions. Catherine pulled out her pencil. I'm listening. First, you don't publish until I say so. I need time to prepare, to tell the people here what's coming, to make arrangements. Agreed. Second, you include everything, not just the violence Marcus inflicted, but how the town knew and did nothing, how the sheriff ruled it accidental even though he damn well knew what was happening in that house, how society creates these monsters and then acts shocked when someone finally fights back. Catherine's eyes gleamed. Absolutely. Third, Harlow paused. Third, if they come for me, you write about that too. You make sure everyone knows what happens to women who defend themselves. You turn my trial, my hanging, whatever happens, you turn it into something that matters. You have my word. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the agreement settling between them. Then Harlow said, his name was Marcus Pierce, and he burned me 17 times with his cigars before I finally understood that begging him to stop would never work. That being perfect would never be enough. That the only way I was going to survive was to make sure he didn't. Catherine started writing, her pencil moving swift and sure across the page. And Harlow started talking. She told Catherine everything. The wedding at 18 to a man 20 years her senior because her parents owed him money, and a daughter was cheaper collateral than cash. The first time he'd hit her, 3 months into the marriage, a backhand across the face for smiling at the grocer. The escalation, fists, then belts, then the cigars when those stopped being effective punishments. She told her about the 3 escape attempts, about being dragged back each time, about the town's collective silence, about the doctor who'd treated her broken ribs and black eyes and never once asked how she'd gotten them. She told her about the day she'd followed Marcus into the woods with his spare rifle, about waiting until he was far enough from civilization that no one would hear, about the confrontation, him laughing when she pointed the gun at him, certain she didn't have the courage to pull the trigger, about proving him wrong. "I shot him 3 times, Harlow said, her voice steady. Once in the chest, once in the throat, once in the head to make sure he was dead. Then I fired the rifle 2 more times into the air, screamed for help, and told the men who came running that his gun had misfired, that I'd tried to save him, but the wounds were too severe." Catherine's pencil never stopped moving. "Did they believe you?" "The sheriff didn't. I could see it in his eyes. But Marcus was already dead, and I was a grieving widow, and admitting they'd all ignored years of abuse was harder than ruling it an accident." Harlow's laugh was hollow. "So they let me go, gave me his estate, told me to take time to heal. But you ran anyway, because I knew that one day someone would start asking questions, that the convenient accident wouldn't hold up forever, that I needed to disappear before they decided the truth was more important than their complicity." Catherine looked up from her notebook, her expression unreadable. "Do you regret it? Killing him?" Harlow thought about the question carefully. "I regret that I had to, that the world is structured in a way that made murder my only viable escape. But do I regret that Marcus Pierce is dead and I'm alive?" She met Catherine's eyes. "No, not even a little bit." "Good," Catherine said firmly, "because you shouldn't. He was a monster, and you did what you had to do to survive." They talked for 3 more hours. Catherine asked careful, probing questions. Harlow answered with raw honesty that left her feeling scraped hollow, but strangely lighter. Like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. By the time the journalist left, promising to send drafts before publishing anything, Harlow felt like she'd run a marathon. She walked out to Nightmare's corral, climbed over the fence, and just stood there with her hand on the stallion's warm neck while the sun set. "I told someone," she whispered to the horse. "Told them everything. About Marcus. About what I did. About why I'm really here." Nightmare turned his head, nuzzled her shoulder gently. "Now, I just have to tell Caleb and Danny and Maria and everyone else who matters before they read it in some newspaper." She laughed shakily. "Should be fun." The stallion snorted as if in agreement. That evening at dinner, Harlow told Caleb what she'd done. He listened in silence, his face unreadable, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. When she finished, he set down his utensils very carefully and said, "When does it publish?" "I don't know yet. Few weeks, maybe. I get to approve the final draft first." "And you think this is the right choice?" It wasn't a question, but Harlow answered anyway. "I think it's the only choice that lets me stop running, so yes." Caleb nodded slowly. Then he stood, walked around the table, and pulled Harlow to her feet. Before she could ask what he was doing, he wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. "Then we'll face it together," he said quietly against her hair. "Whatever comes, you're not alone in this." Harlow's breath caught. She buried her face in his shoulder and let herself be held, let herself feel safe for just a moment before the storm arrived. The weeks that followed were strange and suspended, like waiting for thunder after seeing lightning. Catherine sent drafts, long, detailed articles that laid out Marcus's abuse and Harlow's escape with unflinching clarity. Harlow edited, clarified, approved. The final version was devastating and true. Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued. Harlow kept working with Nightmare, building on the trust they'd established. The stallion was gentler now, more willing to accept handling, though he still had his moments of wild-eyed panic when something triggered old memories. Harlow understood. She had those moments too. She also started helping with the other horses, the ones that had been neglected or poorly trained. Danny worked with her, eager to learn her methods, patience over force, understanding over domination. "It's like you're speaking a different language," the boy said one afternoon as Harlow coaxed a skittish mare to accept a halter. "The language they understand instead of the one we think they should." Most problems with horses aren't really horse problems, Harlow explained. They're human problems. We expect them to think like us, act like us, when they're completely different creatures with different needs and fears. Meeting them where they are instead of forcing them to meet us. That's the secret. My ma would have liked you, Danny said quietly. She used to say stuff like that. Harlow smiled. I think I would have liked her too. The work was satisfying in a way Harlow had never experienced before. Building something instead of running from something. Creating instead of just surviving. For the first time since Marcus's death, she started thinking beyond the next escape route. Started imagining a future that involved more than just making it through another day. Then one evening, as October faded into November and the Montana air turned sharp with coming winter, a telegram arrived. Caleb brought it to her in the study, his face grim. Harlow opened it with shaking hands. Article publishes tomorrow. Brace yourself. See Wells tomorrow. 24 hours until her truth went public. 24 hours until the law, and whatever was left of Marcus's family, learned that his death was no accident. Well, Harlow said, trying for levity and failing, I suppose it's too late to run now. You're not running, Caleb said firmly. We talked about this. We face it together. You don't have to, Harlow. He took her hands, held them tight. I lost Sarah because I didn't fight hard enough. Didn't see what she needed until it was too late. I'm not making that mistake again. Whatever happens when that article publishes, we handle it, together. Harlow looked at this man who'd given her a job when she had nothing, who'd let her risk everything for a broken horse, who'd offered her a home when all she'd known was running. This man who'd become something more than an employer, more than a friend, something she didn't have words for yet, but felt in every quiet dinner, every shared sunrise, every moment of understanding that passed between them without needing to be spoken. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because you remind me that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being terrified and fighting anyway. Because you took a ranch that felt like a graveyard and turned it into something alive again. Because, he paused, jaw working. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the mail-order bride I hired and became the person I can't imagine this place without. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Harlow felt her throat tighten. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Before tomorrow. Before everything changes. He squeezed her hands once more, then let go. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. He left before Harlow could respond, closing the study door quietly behind him. She stood alone in the lamplight, holding the telegram, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, with no idea whether there was solid ground or empty air on the other side. Tomorrow, the world would know what she'd done. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. But tonight she walked out to Nightmare's corral one last time. The stallion was waiting, as if he'd sensed her approach. She climbed into the enclosure, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered all her fears into his mane. And Nightmare, the horse that had killed 3 men and broken 32 more, stood perfectly still and let her cry. Because sometimes the most broken things in the world understood each other best. And sometimes that understanding was the only thing strong enough to carry you through the storm. The article hit the newsstands at dawn. Harlow knew because she was already awake, had been awake all night, sitting at her window and watching the sky slowly bleed from black to gray to pale gold. When she heard the sound of a horse and buggy approaching at speed, her stomach dropped. Danny came running into the house moments later, breathless, clutching a newspaper like it might bite him. "Miss Harlow," he gasped, "it's the whole front page, your name, everything." Harlow took the paper with hands that only shook a little. The headline was bold, uncompromising, "The Woman Who Killed to Survive, a True Account of Abuse, Murder, and Justice Denied." Catherine had kept her word. Every detail was there. Marcus's violence, the town's complicity, the sheriff's convenient ruling, Harlow's desperate decision in those woods. But more than that, Catherine had woven in context statistics, stories of other women trapped in similar hells. She'd made Harlow's story not just personal, but political, a damning indictment of a system that protected abusers and punished victims. It was brilliant. It was devastating. It was going to change everything. Is it true? Danny asked quietly. All of it? Harlow met the boy's eyes. Yes. Good. His voice was fierce, unexpected. I'm glad you killed him. I'm glad he's dead. Before Harlow could respond, Caleb appeared in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour. His face was grim but determined. We need to prepare, he said. The law will come. Maybe not today, but soon. And when they do... He was interrupted by the sound of multiple horses approaching. Fast. They all moved to the window. A group of riders was thundering up the drive. At least a dozen men, led by someone in a sheriff's badge that caught the morning light. That's Sheriff Morrison from the next county over, Caleb said, his jaw tightening. He's got jurisdiction here when our local law is absent. How convenient, Harlow said softly. Her hands were remarkably steady as she set down the newspaper. I suppose I should meet them. Not alone you won't. Caleb was already moving toward the door. Danny, get Maria. Tell her what's happening. Then ride to town. Get Dr. Harrison and Mr. Finch. Tell them we need witnesses. Yes, sir. Danny bolted. Caleb turned back to Harlow. Whatever happens, you let me talk first. Understand? Caleb, this is my... I said let me talk first. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Please. Harlow nodded, her throat tight. They walked out together to meet the riders. Sheriff Morrison dismounted, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that held no warmth. Behind him, his deputies spread out in a clear show of force. Caleb Rohr, Morrison said without preamble. I'm here for the woman known as Eleanor Hayes, real name Harlow Pierce, wanted for questioning in the death of Marcus Pierce of St. Louis. Questioning? Caleb's voice was deceptively mild. Seems like a lot of men for questioning. I've read the article. Woman confessed to murder. That makes her a fugitive. Morrison's eyes found Harlow. Mrs. Pierce, I'm going to need you to come with me. On what charges? Caleb stepped slightly in front of Harlow. The death was ruled accidental. The case was closed. Was closed. New evidence changes things. The confession in that newspaper is evidence. A confession of self-defense, there's a difference. That's for a judge to decide, not you. Morrison's hand moved to rest on his gun. Step aside, Rohr. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. This is my ranch. That's my employee, and you don't have a warrant. Morrison's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult. I'm not the one riding onto private property with an armed posse. Caleb's voice went cold. You want her? You get a proper warrant. Until then, get off my land. The tension ratcheted up, deputies' hands moving to their weapons. Harlow felt her pulse hammering in her throat. This was about to turn violent, and it would be her fault. Caleb, she said quietly, it's all right. I'll go. No. He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on Morrison. You're not going anywhere without due process. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but she was interrupted by the sound of more horses. A lot more horses. Everyone turned to see what looked like half the town of Stillwater riding up the drive. Dr. Harrison in his buggy, Mr. Finch with his camera, the general store owner, the blacksmith. Women Harlow recognized from church, from the market, from the days she'd ridden Nightmare, even some of the ranch hands from neighboring properties. They formed a loose semicircle around the confrontation, silent but present. Morrison looked at them, then back at Caleb. What's this? Witnesses, Caleb said simply. You wanted to arrest someone on my property? Fine. But you're going to do it in front of the entire town, and they're going to remember exactly how this went down. Mr. Finch raised his camera. For the record, Sheriff Morrison, would you care to make a statement about why you're arresting a woman who defended herself from years of documented abuse? Morrison's face flushed. I'm not. This isn't about she confessed to murder. Self-defense, Dr. Harrison corrected, climbing down from his buggy. I've read the article. I've also done some research into Mr. Pierce's history. Did you know he was involved in 3 other suspicious deaths of young women before he married Harlow? All ruled accidents, all conveniently enriching him through inheritance. A murmur ran through the crowd. That's speculation, Morrison said, but he sounded less certain now. Is it? Because I have copies of the coroner's reports right here. Dr. Harrison pulled papers from his bag. Fascinating reading. All three women showed signs of long-term abuse. All three died in circumstances that conveniently removed them from marriages they were known to be unhappy in. Harlow stared at the doctor, stunned. She'd had no idea. Marcus had never mentioned previous wives. Even if that's true, Morrison argued, it doesn't change the fact that she killed him. It establishes a pattern of behavior, a new voice said. Catherine Wells pushed through the crowd, notebook in hand. It suggests that Marcus Pierce was a serial abuser who'd gotten away with it for years. It suggests that Harlow Pierce wasn't his only victim, just the only one who survived. And it raises the question of why you're so eager to arrest his killer instead of investigating why the law failed to protect 4 women from a monster. Morrison looked around at the crowd, at the faces watching him with increasing hostility. I'm doing my job. Your job is to protect citizens, Dr. Harrison said quietly. Sometimes that means protecting them from men in their own homes. You failed at that. The least you can do is not punish the woman who had to protect herself. I don't make the laws, but you enforce them, Caleb cut in, and you have discretion in how you enforce them. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to your county and tell whoever sent you here that Harlow Pierce is under my protection. That if they want to prosecute her, they're going to have to go through me, my lawyers, and every person standing here today. That we're going to make this the ugliest, most public trial in Montana history. That we're going to drag every piece of Marcus Pierce's past into the light and make damn sure the whole country knows exactly what kind of man he was. Caleb stepped forward, his presence commanding despite Morrison's size advantage. Or, he continued softly, you could decide that sometimes justice and law aren't the same thing, that sometimes a closed case should stay closed, that sometimes the woman who survives doesn't need to be punished for it. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison looked at Harlow, really looked at her for the first time. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch, refusing to look away. Finally, the sheriff said, I'll need to consult with the district attorney. You do that, Caleb said, and while you're consulting, we'll be right here, not going anywhere. Morrison remounted his horse, gestured to his deputies. This isn't over. Maybe not, Caleb agreed, but it's not as simple as you thought it was, either. The sheriff and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and uncertain futures in their wake. The moment they were gone, the crowd erupted. People rushed forward, surrounding Harlow with words of support, offers of help, angry declarations that they'd known something was wrong in street. Lewis, that the law had failed her, that she deserved protection, not prosecution. It was overwhelming. Harlow felt herself swaying, the lack of sleep and crushing anxiety finally catching up with her. Caleb's hand found her elbow, steadying her. Inside, he said quietly, before you collapse. He guided her through the crowd, Danny running interference until they were back in the house. Maria immediately pressed hot coffee into Harlow's hands and started fussing in rapid Spanish. What just happened? Harlow asked, her voice shaking. The town chose you, Dr. Harrison said. He'd followed them inside along with Catherine and Mr. Finch. They read the article. They saw themselves in your story, or their daughters, their sisters, their wives, and they decided that the law might not always be right, but community can be. But Morrison will be back, Catherine said pragmatically, with a warrant next time, with more men. The district attorney will want to make an example of you, especially now that the story's public. Then we fight it in court, Caleb said firmly. We get the best lawyers money can buy. We make sure the jury hears everything, Marcus's history, the abuse, the self-defense claim. And if we lose? Harlow asked quietly. The room went silent. Finally, Dr. Harrison said, Then we make sure your story lives on anyway. That's what Catherine's article did. It made you more than just a defendant. It made you a symbol. And symbols are harder to hang than people. Not impossible, though, Harlow said with a bitter smile. No, the doctor admitted. Not impossible, but worth fighting for. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Caleb hired lawyers from Denver, men with sharp minds and sharper tongues who'd built careers on defending the defenseless. They descended on the ranch like a small army, taking depositions, gathering evidence, building a case that transformed Harlow from murderer to survivor. Catherine wrote follow-up articles. Other papers picked up the story. Letters arrived from across the country, some supportive, some vicious, all proof that Harlow's private tragedy had become a public debate. And through it all, Harlow kept working with the horses. It was the only thing that kept her sane. Those morning hours with Nightmare and the growing collection of damaged animals that ranchers had started bringing to the property. Word had spread about her methods, about how she'd transformed a killer stallion into something gentler, and suddenly everyone wanted to see if she could work the same magic on their problem horses. She couldn't always. Some animals were too far gone, too broken by cruelty or fear. But many, most even, responded to patience and consistency, to being treated like individuals with feelings rather than tools to be used. Danny worked beside her, learning, growing in confidence. The boy had a gift for this work, Harlow realized, a gentleness that belied his rough upbringing. "You're going to be better at this than I am someday," she told him one morning as he successfully calmed a mare that had been abused by her previous owner. "Learned from the best," Danny said, grinning. "Your mother taught you to be kind. I just gave you a framework for it." The boy's smile faded slightly. "You think she'd be proud of what I'm becoming?" "I think she'd be amazed," Harlow said softly, "and so grateful you found a place to grow into the person you were meant to be." Danny ducked his head, but Harlow saw the shine of tears in his eyes. On a gray afternoon in late November, Sheriff Morrison returned. This time he came alone, no armed posse, just him and a horse and an envelope that he handed to Caleb without a word. The warrant. Harlow was ordered to appear in court in St. Louis in 2 weeks to answer charges of murder in the death of Marcus Pierce. "I'm sorry," Morrison said quietly. "I tried to argue against it, but the district attorney won't let it go. Says the article makes it impossible to ignore." "We'll be there," Caleb said, his voice tight, "with lawyers and witnesses and every piece of evidence we can find." Morrison nodded, then looked at Harlow. "For what it's worth, I hope you win. My sister was married to a man like yours. She didn't make it out, so yeah, I hope you win." He rode away, leaving them with the warrant and 2 weeks to prepare for a trial that would determine whether Harlow lived or died. The ranch became a war room. Lawyers spread documents across every available surface. Catherine coordinated with other journalists, building a media campaign that would make the trial impossible to sweep under the rug. Dr. Harrison compiled medical evidence, testimony from people who'd known Marcus, proof of his pattern of abuse, and Harlow prepared herself for the possibility that none of it would matter, that she'd stood up, told the truth, and would hang for it anyway. The night before they were scheduled to leave for St. Louis, Harlow couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs, found Caleb in the study, nursing a whiskey and staring at the fire. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, managed a tired smile. "Kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong tomorrow." "Just tomorrow?" Harlow sat down across from him. "I've been cataloging disaster scenarios for weeks. And yet you're still going through with it. Don't really have a choice at this point. You could run." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Right now, tonight. I'd give you money, a horse, whatever you need. You could disappear. I'd tell them you escaped in the night, that I couldn't stop you." Harlow looked at this man who'd offered her safety, support, and something deeper that neither of them had quite put into words yet. "I could, but then I'd spend the rest of my life running, looking over my shoulder, never building anything real." She shook her head. "I'm done running, Caleb. Whatever happens in that courtroom, at least I'll face it standing still." "Even if standing still gets you killed?" "Even then." She reached across the space between them, took his hand. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a place to land, for fighting for me when you didn't have to, for—" Her voice cracked. "For making me remember that not all men are monsters." Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. "Harlow, I need to tell you something. In case tomorrow goes badly, in case I don't get another chance." "Don't! I love you." The words came out rough, urgent. Not as an employer, not as some kind of savior complex. "I love you because you're fierce and brave, and you turned my dying ranch into something alive again. Because you see broken things and choose to heal them instead of destroy them. Because you make me want to be better than I've been. Harlow felt tears streaming down her face. Caleb, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. Before tomorrow. Before whatever comes next. She stood, pulled him to his feet, and kissed him. It was desperate and gentle, and tasted like whiskey and tears and everything they might lose tomorrow. When they finally broke apart, Harlow pressed her forehead against his and whispered, I love you too, and I'm going to fight like hell to come back to you. Promise me something, Caleb said. If it goes wrong, if they convict you, don't give up. Appeal. Delay. Buy time. Let us keep fighting. I promise. They held each other in the firelight, two broken people who'd found something whole in each other, and tried not to think about how fragile that wholeness really was. The trial began on a freezing December morning in a St. Louis courtroom packed with journalists, curious citizens, and Marcus Pierce's family, a collection of well-dressed vultures who watched Harlow with undisguised hatred. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Harlow had confessed to killing her husband, premeditated murder. The death penalty was warranted. But the defense was ready. Caleb's lawyers called witness after witness, doctors who'd treated Harlow's injuries over the years, testifying to the systematic abuse, neighbors who'd heard screaming, shop owners who'd seen the bruises, the coroner who'd examined Marcus's previous wives and found disturbing patterns. Catherine Wells took the stand and read sections of her article aloud, her voice clear and unwavering as she detailed Marcus's reign of terror. And then, on the third day, Harlow testified. She told her story, all of it, nothing held back. The burns, the beatings, the failed escape attempts, the desperate decision in those woods when she'd finally understood that asking permission to survive wasn't going to work. Did you want to kill him? The prosecutor asked on cross-examination. Harlow met the man's eyes. I wanted to live. Killing him was the only way to make that happen. So you admit it was premeditated. I admit that I planned to survive. If you want to call that premeditation, fine. But I call it self-defense. The prosecutor tried to shake her testimony, to paint her as a cold-blooded killer who'd murdered for money. But Harlow held firm, her voice steady, her truth unassailable. When she finally stepped down, she felt hollowed out but clean. She'd said everything, held nothing back. Now it was up to 12 strangers to decide whether surviving made her a murderer. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Harlow spent them in a cell, unable to sleep, playing out every possible scenario. Caleb visited daily, bringing news from the trial, messages of support from people across the country who'd read Catherine's articles and were demanding justice. But justice was a slippery thing, and Harlow had learned long ago that wanting something didn't make it real. On the afternoon of the second day, the jury returned. Harlow was brought back into the courtroom, her wrists shackled, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She found Caleb in the gallery, his face gray with worry, Danny beside him, and Maria, and Dr. Harrison, and Catherine with her notebook ready to record whatever came next. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Harlow Pierce, in the matter of the death of Marcus Pierce. The pause felt like eternity. Not guilty by reason of self-defense. The courtroom erupted. Half the gallery cheered. Marcus's family screamed protests. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding order. But Harlow heard none of it. She just stood there, shaking, barely able to process the words. Not guilty. She'd won. She'd told the truth and survived it. The shackles came off. Caleb pushed through the crowd, wrapped her in his arms, held her while she sobbed against his chest. Danny was there too, and Maria, everyone talking at once, crying and laughing and celebrating. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, holding signs that read, Justice for Harlow, and survivors deserve protection, and we believe you. Catherine appeared at Harlow's elbow. You did it. You changed the conversation. I just told the truth. That's all it took. Catherine squeezed her hand. The rest of us just made sure people listened. The journey back to Montana took 3 days. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the ranch, Harlow felt something in her chest unknot for the first time in months. Home. This was home. Not a hiding place. Not a temporary refuge. Home. The ranch had changed in her absence. More horses in the corrals. animals that neighboring ranchers had brought for rehabilitation, a new barn under construction, signs of growth, of life, of something being built rather than just maintained. And in the center corral, Nightmare waited. Harlow went to him first before unpacking, before even taking off her coat. The stallion nickered when he saw her, trotted to the fence, pressed his massive head against her chest. "I'm back," she whispered. "I'm home. And I'm staying." Over the following weeks, as winter settled over Montana in earnest, Harlow threw herself into work. The horse rehabilitation program she'd started almost by accident became official. Caleb hired Danny as a full-time trainer. They drew up plans to expand, to create a formal sanctuary for abused and neglected horses. Word spread. More animals arrived. More people came to learn Harlow's methods. And one evening, as she and Caleb sat in the study reviewing accounts, he set down his ledger and said, "I've been thinking. Dangerous habit." He smiled. "I'd like to make this official. The partnership, the ranch, us." Harlow's heart skipped. "Caleb, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I know you need time after everything, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ready, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Harlow looked at this man who'd stood beside her through a murder trial, who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd loved her at her most broken and never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. "Ask me," she said. "What? Ask me? Now, because I'm ready. I've been ready since the night before the trial when you told me you loved me. I just didn't know if I deserved it." "Harlow, ask me, Caleb." He stood, pulled her to her feet, looked at her with those gray eyes that saw all the way through her and loved what they found. "Harlow Pierce, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build this life with me? Will you let me love you for as long as we both shall live?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in the spring, a small ceremony on the ranch with Danny as best man and Maria weeping happy tears. Catherine came to document it, but this time her camera captured joy instead of pain. And when Caleb kissed his bride, Nightmare, standing in the corral nearby with a garland of wildflowers woven into his mane, screamed his approval to the Montana sky. The years that followed weren't perfect. There were setbacks, challenges, moments when the past threatened to drag Harlow back into darkness. But she faced them standing still, with Caleb beside her and a growing community of survivors who'd found their way to the ranch. They expanded the sanctuary, hired more trainers, developed a reputation for saving horses others had given up on. Danny grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over day-to-day operations when Harlow and Caleb needed to step back. Marcus's family tried once to sue for wrongful death. The case was dismissed before it even went to trial. Silas Drayton attempted to sabotage the ranch's reputation. Catherine's follow-up articles destroyed his credibility so thoroughly he left Montana and never returned. And Nightmare, the horse that had started everything, lived to be 27 years old. He died peacefully one summer evening, lying in the grass with his head in Harlow's lap, the sun warm on his scarred coat. "Thank you," Harlow whispered as his breathing slowed. "Thank you for being brave when I needed you. Thank you for choosing trust over fear. Thank you for teaching me that broken things can heal." The stallion's eyes closed for the last time. They buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch under a marker that read, "Nightmare, who taught us that the most broken souls can become the bravest hearts." 10 years after the trial, Catherine published a book, The Woman and the Horse: How One Act of Courage Changed Everything. It became a bestseller, sparking a national conversation about domestic violence, self-defense laws, and the rights of survivors. 20 years after, the ranch had trained over 300 horses and helped establish similar sanctuaries across the West. 30 years after, Harlow Pierce Roar, no longer hiding, no longer running, no longer afraid, stood on her front porch and watched the sun set over land that had become a symbol of healing. Caleb emerged from the house, slipped his arm around her waist. His hair was gray now, his face more lined, but his eyes held the same warmth they'd had the day he'd first offered her a home. "Thinking about him?" he asked, knowing without needing to specify whether she meant Marcus or Nightmare. "Both," Harlow admitted. "Marcus taught me I could survive. Nightmare taught me I could heal, and you—" She turned to face him. You taught me I could live. Actually live, not just survive. We taught each other, Caleb said softly. That's how it works. Inside the house, they could hear Danny's children laughing. The ranch had become a family business, passed down through chosen relatives rather than blood. Maria was long gone, but her recipes lived on in the kitchen. The stone she'd given Harlow sat on the mantel, a reminder that soft things could break mountains. And in the corrals below, horses that had been beaten, starved, abused, and abandoned were learning to trust again. Learning that not all hands hurt, that patience existed, that healing was possible. Harlow had spent her 20s running from a monster, her 30s proving she wasn't one herself, her 40s building something that would outlast her. And now, in her 50s, she finally understood what freedom actually meant. It wasn't the absence of fear. It wasn't never looking back. It was choosing every single day to stand still and fight for the life you wanted instead of running from the one you didn't. It was taking your scars and turning them into strength. It was looking at broken things, horses, people, yourself, and seeing possibility instead of ruin. Come on, Caleb said, tugging her toward the door. Dinner's ready, and Danny's bringing the grandkids over. They want to hear the story again. Which story? The one about the woman who tamed Nightmare. Harlow smiled. I didn't tame him. I just loved him enough that he decided to be brave. Same thing, Caleb said. But Harlow knew better. Taming was about dominance, about breaking something wild into submission. What she'd done with Nightmare, what she'd done with herself, was something else entirely. It was about seeing the terror beneath the violence, understanding that hurt things, and choosing, against all logic and survival instinct, to respond with compassion instead of fear. That's what had saved Nightmare. That's what had saved her. And that's what the ranch represented now. A place where broken things came to remember that they'd been whole once and could be whole again. Not perfect. Never perfect. But whole. As Harlow walked inside, she glanced back one last time at Nightmare's grave on the hill. The evening light painted it gold, and for just a moment she could almost see him, a massive black stallion running free against the Montana sky. No longer afraid, no longer angry, just free. She whispered a final thank you to the horse that had saved her by letting her save him. Then she closed the door and turned toward the warmth and light and laughter of the family she'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Because that's what survivors did. They didn't just endure. They transformed. They took their pain and turned it into purpose, their trauma into triumph, their nightmares into hope. And sometimes, if they were very lucky and very brave, they built something so beautiful from their broken pieces that people forgot they'd ever been shattered at all. Harlow Pierce had been many things: victim, fugitive, killer, survivor. But in the end, she was simply this: a woman who'd chosen to heal instead of harden, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of fear. And in a world that tried so hard to break her, that choice, that simple, terrifying, courageous choice, changed everything. Not just for her, but for every broken thing that found its way to her door, seeking the same thing she'd once sought: a chance, a choice, a reason to believe that even nightmares could have happy endings.